A telegram arrived 3 hours before Eleanor Whitfield's wedding. 7 words that shattered everything. The children are gone. He sold them all. Eleanor had traveled 1,000 miles to marry a widower and become a mother to his 7 children. Instead, she discovered the cruelest betrayal imaginable. Her groom had traded his own sons and daughters like livestock to settle gambling debts. Scattered across Kansas territory, bound by brutal labor contracts, those children were disappearing into a system designed to break them. But Eleanor Whitfield wasn't the kind of woman who ran from a fight. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and comment your city below so I can see how far this journey travels. Now let me tell you about the day one woman declared war on injustice itself. The train's whistle cut through the February cold like a blade through silk, and Eleanor Whitfield pressed her gloved hand against the frosted window, watching the endless Kansas prairie roll past in waves of brown and gray. 26 years old, unmarried, unwanted by Boston society, those were the facts that had driven her onto this westbound train 3 days ago. The advertisement had been simple enough. Widower with 7 children seeks capable wife. Must be of good character and willing to work. Kansas territory. She'd answered within a week. Now, as the train slowed toward Millbrook Station, Eleanor caught her reflection in the glass. Dark hair pinned severely beneath a traveling hat, gray eyes that her mother had once called too direct for a lady, and a mouth that smiled rarely but meant it when it did. She looked like what she was, a woman with nowhere else to go and nothing left to lose. "First time out west, miss?" The conductor's voice startled her. "Yes." Eleanor straightened her traveling coat. "I'm to be married this afternoon." The conductor's weathered face softened. "Well now, congratulations. Anyone I might know?" "Harold Pierce. He has a farm about 5 miles from town." Something flickered across the conductor's expression. Too quick to name, but Eleanor caught it. Pity, perhaps. Or warning. "Pierce," he repeated slowly. "Yes, ma'am. I know the name." He tipped his cap and moved on before she could ask what that look meant. The station was smaller than Eleanor had imagined. Just a wooden platform and a building that served as both ticket office and telegraph station. A handful of people waited on the platform. 2 farmers in work clothes, an older woman with a market basket, and a tall man in a dark suit who stepped forward as Eleanor descended from the train. "Miss Whitfield?" His voice was formal, careful. "Yes?" "I'm Caleb Moore. Mr. Pierce asked me to meet you and bring you to the hotel. He'll collect you from there before the ceremony." Eleanor noticed what he didn't say, that the groom himself hadn't come to meet her. She noticed, too, the way Caleb Moore's jaw tightened when he spoke Harold's name, and how his eyes wouldn't quite meet hers. "Is something wrong, Mr. Moore?" "No, ma'am." He reached for her trunk. "Welcome to Millbrook." The hotel was a 2-story wooden building on Main Street, freshly painted white with green shutters. Caleb carried her trunk inside and set it down in the small lobby, where a woman in her 30s stood behind the desk. She had kind eyes and hair the color of honey, pinned up in a practical bun. "Eleanor Whitfield?" The woman came around the desk, wiping her hands on her apron. "I'm Lydia Moore, Caleb's sister. We've prepared room 7 for you. It has a nice view of the street, and there's hot water if you'd like to wash up before the ceremony." "Thank you." Eleanor felt the long journey settling into her bones. "That's very kind. Come with me." Lydia picked up Eleanor's carpetbag. "Caleb, bring the trunk." The room was simple but clean. A brass bed with a patchwork quilt, a washstand with a porcelain basin, a wardrobe, and a window overlooking Millbrook's main street. Eleanor had stayed in far worse during her years as a companion to elderly ladies in Boston. Lydia set the carpetbag down and turned, her expression suddenly serious. "Miss Whitfield, may I speak plainly?" "Please do." "How much do you know about Harold Pierce?" Eleanor untied her bonnet. "I know he's 43 years old, a widower and a farmer. He has 7 children ranging in age from 4 to 14. His wife died 18 months ago, and he needs help managing the household and children." She paused. "That's what his letters said, at least." Lydia and Caleb exchanged a look that made Eleanor's stomach tighten. "What aren't you telling me?" Caleb cleared his throat. "Ma'am, It's not our place to— The children are gone, Lydia interrupted, her voice quiet but firm. All of them. The room seemed to tilt. Gone? What do you mean, gone? Harold Pierce sold them. Lydia's words dropped like stones into still water. 6 weeks ago. He had gambling debts, large ones, to some very dangerous men. When they came to collect, he didn't have the money. So he signed contracts binding his children out to labor. All 7 of them, scattered across 3 counties. The youngest is only 4 years old. Eleanor sat down heavily on the bed. That's not possible. You can't just sell children. You can't sell them outright, no, Caleb said. But you can sign them into indentured labor contracts. Perfectly legal if the parent consents. The children work off the debt, supposedly getting room and board in exchange. In reality, he stopped. In reality, it's slavery, Lydia finished. Those children are working in mines, on farms, in factories. Some of them are with families that might treat them decently. But most, she shook her head. Most aren't that lucky. Eleanor's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her knees. And he's marrying me this afternoon? After doing that to his own children? He needs a wife, Caleb said bluntly. The farm's falling apart without help, and he needs respectability. Someone to make it look like he's trying to rebuild, to be a family man again. Some of the town won't do business with him anymore, not after what he did. But plenty still will, Lydia added bitterly. Men protect their own out here, especially when money's involved. Eleanor stood, pacing to the window. Down on Main Street, a wagon rolled past. 2 women walked together, their heads bent in conversation. Normal life continuing as if children weren't being worked to death in the darkness. Where are they? She asked. The children. Where exactly did he send them? Lydia hesitated. Why? Because I want to know. Eleanor turned, and something in her face made Lydia step back. Tell me everything. For the next hour, Lydia and Caleb talked. They'd pieced together what they could from courthouse records, overheard conversations, and careful questions asked in the right places. The picture that emerged was damning. The oldest boy, Thomas, age 14, had been sent to work in a coal mine near Hutchinson. The contract was for 5 years. Margaret, 13, was housekeeping for a family in Salina. They had a reputation for cruelty. The twins, John and James, age 11, had been separated. John went to a cattle ranch, James to a wheat farm. Both were brutal places. Sarah, age 8, was working in a textile factory in a town called Prospect. Daniel, 6, had been sent to a family that ran a roadside inn. Nobody knew much about them. And Benjamin, the youngest at 4 years old, had gone to a farm near Council Grove. The farmer who took him had a history of violence. 4 years old, Eleanor whispered. He sent a 4-year-old child away. Harold told people it was for the children's own good, Lydia said, her voice thick with disgust. That they'd learn trades, become useful. Some people believed him. Or pretended to. Eleanor walked to her trunk and opened it. She pulled out a small leather pouch and emptied it onto the bed. Coins and bills tumbled out, every cent she owned in the world. She'd saved it over 6 years of working as a companion, living in other people's houses, wearing cast-off dresses, denying herself everything except the dream of someday having a home of her own. How much? Caleb asked quietly. $237. Eleanor looked at the money. Is it enough? Enough for what? To buy them back. Eleanor met Lydia's eyes. These labor contracts, they can be purchased, can't they? Transferred to a new holder? Theoretically, yes. But then that's what I'm going to do. Eleanor's voice was steady now, certain. I'm going to find every one of those children, and I'm going to bring them home. Miss Whitfield, Caleb stepped forward. Eleanor, do you understand what you're saying? Those contracts are held by men who won't want to give them up. The children are valuable labor. And even if you could buy the contracts, Harold is still their legal father. He could just sell them again, Eleanor finished. Yes, I understand. Which is why I need to know, is there a lawyer in this town? Someone who might be willing to fight Harold Pierce in court? Lydia's eyes widened. You'd challenge him for custody? I'd challenge him for everything. Eleanor began repacking her money. He posted an advertisement for a mail-order bride. I answered in good faith. I traveled 1,000 miles to marry him and become a mother to his children. Instead, I arrived to find he's discarded those children like unwanted furniture. I'd say that constitutes fraud, wouldn't you? A slow smile spread across Caleb's face. There's a lawyer named Samuel Bennett. He's young, but he's sharp. And he hates Harold Pierce. Pierce swindled Bennett's father out of some land 2 years ago. Take me to him. Now? Lydia glanced at the clock. The wedding's in 3 hours. Eleanor fastened her traveling cloak. Then we'd better hurry. Samuel Bennett's office was above the general store, reached by an outside staircase. He was younger than Eleanor expected, no more than 30, with ink-stained fingers and a face that suggested he smiled more often than circumstances currently allowed. Miss Whitfield. He stood when they entered. I heard you'd arrived in town. I'm sorry to say congratulations seem premature. Mr. Bennett, I need to know something. If a man advertises for a wife under false pretenses, specifically claiming to have 7 children in need of a mother when he's actually disposed of those children, does the intended bride have any legal recourse? Bennett's eyebrows rose. He gestured to chairs. Sit, please, and tell me everything. Eleanor did. She laid out the facts as she knew them. The advertisement, the letters from Harold that mentioned the children repeatedly, her journey west, and the revelation that greeted her upon arrival. She watched Bennett's face carefully as she spoke, looking for skepticism or dismissal. She found neither. And your intention, Bennett asked when she finished, to recover the children, by purchase or by law, and to prevent Harold Pierce from ever having authority over them again. Bennett leaned back, tapping his pen against his desk. It's not impossible. Difficult, yes. Expensive, certainly. But not impossible. He pulled a clean sheet of paper toward him. First, we'd need to locate each child and determine the exact terms of their contracts. Some might be more easily challenged than others. For instance, if the child is being mistreated, we could argue for breach of the labor agreement's terms. And custody? That's trickier. Pierce is the legal father. Under Kansas law, that gives him considerable authority. However, Bennett began writing. If we can demonstrate abandonment, abuse, or unfitness as a parent, we might petition for guardianship to be transferred. It would help if you were actually married to him. A stepmother has more standing than a stranger, but given the circumstances, I wouldn't recommend going through with the ceremony. I have no intention of marrying that man, Eleanor said flatly. Good. Then our strategy is this. We document everything. We locate the children and assess their conditions. We challenge the contracts where possible, and we build a case for Pierce's parental unfitness. In the meantime, you'll need somewhere to stay that isn't Pierce's farm. She can stay at the hotel, Lydia said immediately, for as long as needed. Eleanor touched her arm gratefully, then looked back at Bennett. How much will this cost? My fee can wait until you've recovered the children. Right now, you need that money for buying back the contracts and for travel expenses. Bennett stood. But Miss Whitfield, Eleanor, you need to understand something. The men who hold these contracts won't all be reasonable. Some will refuse to negotiate. Some might be dangerous. And Pierce himself will fight you. He'll spread rumors, turn people against you, maybe worse. Are you prepared for that? Eleanor thought of a 4-year-old boy working on a farm known for violence. She thought of twins torn apart, of a teenage boy in a coal mine, of a girl barely 13 serving a cruel family. She thought of every comfortable choice she could make, return to Boston, find another situation, pretend she'd never heard the name Pierce. Mr. Bennett, she said, I've spent my entire adult life being told what I couldn't do, where I couldn't go, how I couldn't live. I've been dependent on the charity and tolerance of others, invisible unless I was useful, silent unless spoken to. I came west because I had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. I won't walk away from 7 children who need someone to fight for them just because it's hard or dangerous or improper. She stood. So yes, I'm prepared. The only question is whether you are. Bennett grinned. I'll draw up the paperwork. Give me 2 days to research the contracts and file the initial motions. In the meantime, you might want to let Harold Pierce know you won't be showing up to the wedding. Eleanor's smile was sharp. Oh, I'll show up. I want to see his face when I tell him exactly what I think of him. The courthouse clock was striking 2 when Eleanor walked into Millbrook's small church. Harold Pierce stood at the altar, talking to the minister, a thin, nervous man who kept adjusting his collar. Pierce was tall and broad-shouldered, his face weathered from years of farming. He looked, Eleanor thought, like any other hard-working frontier man. Nothing in his appearance suggested the monster beneath. He turned as her footsteps echoed in the empty church. Eleanor, you came. I was beginning to worry. Don't. Her voice cut across his like a knife. Don't pretend concern, Mr. Pierce. Don't pretend anything. His expression shifted, grew wary. I don't know what your children, where are they? The silence stretched. The minister looked between them, confused. They're being cared for, Harold said finally. I've found good situations for them. It's common out here. Children go to work, learn trades. You sold them. Eleanor walked closer. You sold your children to pay your gambling debts. 7 children, scattered across 3 counties, working in conditions that would break a grown man. And you thought you'd just find a replacement mother, someone to cook and clean and make your farm respectable again, and no one would mention the children you threw away. Harold's jaw tightened. You don't understand how things work out here. Those children needed discipline, needed to learn the value of work. Their mother spoiled them, let them run wild. I did what was necessary. You did what was convenient. Eleanor's hands were shaking with rage, but her voice remained steady. You took the easy way out, and 7 children are paying the price. But here's what you need to understand, Mr. Pierce. I'm not marrying you. I'm never marrying you, and I'm going to spend every dollar I have and every ounce of strength I possess bringing those children back and making sure you never hurt them again. Harold's face darkened. You have no right. I have every right. You advertised for a wife to mother your children. I answered that advertisement in good faith. Your fraud nullifies any agreement between us, and when I'm finished, this town will know exactly what kind of man you are. She turned to leave, but Harold's voice stopped her. You're just a woman alone with no money and no standing. You think anyone will listen to you? You think you can challenge me? I'm warning you, Miss Whitfield, stay away from my children. Eleanor looked back over her shoulder. They're not your children anymore, Mr. Pierce. You gave up that right when you traded them for poker debts, and I'm not afraid of you. She walked out of the church into the February cold, her heart pounding. Behind her, she heard Harold's voice raised in anger, the minister's placating murmurs. She didn't care. She'd thrown down the gauntlet. Now came the hard part. At the hotel, Lydia had hot coffee and warm bread waiting. How did he take it? Badly. Eleanor wrapped her hands around the coffee cup. He threatened me. Caleb, who'd been sitting by the stove, stood up. What kind of threat? The vague kind. Warnings to stay away from the children, implications that I don't know what I'm dealing with. Eleanor sipped the coffee. He's afraid. Good. He should be. Eleanor. Lydia sat down across from her. I need you to understand. Harold has friends in this town, men who owe him favors, who'll take his side because he's one of them. You're an outsider, an unmarried woman challenging a father's rights. It's not going to be easy to find support. Then I'll work without support. Eleanor set down her cup. Lydia, Caleb, I'm grateful for everything you've done, but I can't ask you to risk your reputation or your business by associating with me. This is my fight. That's the stupidest thing I've heard all day, Caleb said bluntly. You think we told you about those children just so you could fight alone? Lydia and I have been waiting for someone to stand up to Pierce. We're not backing down now. Lydia nodded. Besides, you'll need help. The children are spread out over 100 miles. You can't reach them all alone, not quickly enough. And time matters, Eleanor. Winter's hard on children in those situations. Every day they're gone is another day of suffering. Eleanor felt something crack in her chest, the armor she'd built up over years of learning to rely only on herself. Thank you, she whispered. Thank us by letting us help. Caleb pulled a map from his coat pocket and spread it on the table. I've marked the locations where we think the children are. The closest is Benjamin, the youngest. He's about 20 miles north at a farm outside Council Grove. If we left at dawn, we could reach him by afternoon. Eleanor studied the map. What do we know about the farmer who has him? Lydia's expression darkened. His name is Jacob Reeves. He's known for a temper and for working his hired men half to death. No one local would work for him anymore, which is probably why he agreed to take a 4-year-old. Cheap labor that can't quit. Then we go there first. Eleanor's decision was instant. If Benjamin's in danger, he can't wait while we plan strategy. We get him out now. It won't be as simple as just taking him, Caleb warned. Reeves has a legal contract. We'll need to either buy it out or prove he's violating its terms. Then we do whatever's necessary. Eleanor looked between them. Can you be ready at dawn? They nodded. That night, Eleanor barely slept. She lay in the hotel bed, listening to the wind rattle the windows, and thought about 7 children in 7 different places. What were they doing right now? Were they safe? Were they warm? Did they understand why their father had sent them away? Or did they think they'd done something wrong? Benjamin would be the hardest. At 4 years old, he was too young to understand contracts or money or adult cruelty. He would only know that his father had sent him away and no one had come to bring him home. Until now. Eleanor rose before dawn and dressed in her most practical clothes, a dark wool skirt, a sturdy shirtwaist, and her traveling coat. She packed a small bag with essentials, including every dollar she owned. In the lobby, she found Caleb already waiting, a rifle propped against his chair and a grim determination on his face. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready." They took Caleb's wagon north, following a rutted road that cut through empty prairie. The sun rose slowly, turning the frozen grass to gold. Eleanor watched the landscape roll past and tried to imagine bringing a child back along this same road. Tried to picture reunion instead of separation. What was their mother like, she asked. Harold's wife? Caleb was silent for a moment. Mary Pierce was a good woman, kind. The children adored her. When she died, he shook his head. Harold fell apart, started drinking, gambling, stopped working the farm properly. The children tried to hold things together, but they were just kids. Thomas, the oldest, he was only 12 when his mother died. Tried to be the man of the house, but Harold resented him for it. The whole situation was a powder keg. And then Harold lit the match. Yeah. They reached the outskirts of Council Grove as the sun climbed toward noon. Caleb asked directions at a general store, and a clerk pointed them toward the Reeves farm, another 5 miles on a side road that was barely more than a track. The Reeves place was exactly what Eleanor had feared. The farmhouse was run down, the barn leaning, the fields barren. As they pulled into the yard, a dog barked frantically from the end of a chain. There was no sign of life except for smoke rising from the chimney. Caleb knocked on the door. After a long moment, it opened to reveal a man in his 50s, unshaven and hostile. What? Mr. Reeves, I'm Caleb Moore, from Millbrook. This is Eleanor Whitfield. We're here about Benjamin Pierce. Reeves's expression didn't change. What about him? We'd like to see him, Eleanor said, and to discuss the terms of his contract. Contract's not for sale. We haven't offered a price yet. Don't care what you offer. Boy works for me for 5 years. That's the deal I made with his father. Eleanor forced herself to stay calm. Mr. Reeves, surely you understand that a 4-year-old child isn't capable of doing farm work. Whatever you're paying for him, it can't be worth... I said the contract's not for sale. Reeves started to close the door, but Caleb's boot blocked it. We're not leaving without seeing the boy, Caleb said quietly. Something dangerous flickered in Reeves's eyes. He studied Caleb, measuring. Whatever he saw made him step back. Fine. He's in the barn, but you're wasting your time. The barn was dark and cold. Eleanor's eyes adjusted slowly, and then she saw him. A small figure in the corner, sitting on a pile of dirty straw. He was wearing clothes too large for him, his face smudged with dirt, his dark hair matted. When he saw them, he didn't move. Benjamin? Eleanor kept her voice gentle as she approached. My name is Eleanor. I'm a friend of your father's. The boy's eyes, dark brown, enormous in his thin face, fixed on her with an expression far too old for 4 years. He didn't speak. Eleanor knelt in the straw, ignoring the cold and damp. "Benjamin, I've come to take you home. Back to Millbrook, where your brothers and sisters are. Would you like that?" Still no response. Eleanor looked closer and felt her heart stop. Bruises on the child's arms, visible even in the dim light, and his hands, his small 4-year-old hands, were scraped raw. What has he been doing? Her voice shook as she looked at Reeves, who'd followed them into the barn. Work, same as everyone else. He's 4 years old. Old enough to carry water, feed chickens, gather eggs. He's lazy, that's all. Needs discipline. Eleanor stood slowly. Every instinct screamed at her to grab Benjamin and run, but she forced herself to think. The law was on Reeves's side. If she took the boy without legal authority, she'd be guilty of kidnapping. She needed to be smart. "Mr. Reeves," she said, "I'm offering you $200 to terminate Benjamin's contract." Reeves laughed. "200? I paid Harold Pierce $150 just to get the contract. Plus I've fed and housed the boy for 6 weeks. You want him, it'll cost you $500. That's extortion. That's business." Eleanor's hands clenched. She didn't have $500. She didn't even have $300, and judging by Reeves's expression, he knew it. Caleb stepped forward. "What if we involve the sheriff? Those bruises on the boy suggest abuse. The contract terms specify proper care and treatment. You involve the sheriff, I'll have Pierce back out here vouching for me. The boy's father signed him over legal and proper. Sheriff won't interfere." Reeves crossed his arms. "So unless you've got $500, you can get off my property." Eleanor looked at Benjamin. The boy was watching her with those 2 old eyes, and she could see the question in them. "Are you leaving too?" She couldn't. She couldn't walk away and leave him in this place. "I'll get your money," she heard herself say. "I'll have $500 by tomorrow, but I'm taking Benjamin now, today." "No deal." Reeves started toward the barn door. "Wait." Eleanor's mind raced. "I have $200 in cash right now. Take that as a deposit. I'll bring the remaining $300 tomorrow, and you'll sign the contract termination then. If I don't show up with the money, keep my $200 and the boy. That's more than fair." Reeves considered. $200 in hand was tempting. Eleanor could see it in his face. And he probably figured she wouldn't be able to raise the remaining $300 anyway. "Show me the money." Eleanor pulled out her leather pouch and counted out $200 in bills and coins. She held it out, and Reeves snatched it. "Tomorrow," he said. "Noon. You don't show up with $300 more. I keep your money and the boy, and you'll be banned from this property. Understood?" "Understood." Reeves pocketed the money and walked out of the barn, already dismissing them. Eleanor turned back to Benjamin. She knelt again, meeting his eyes. "Benjamin, I don't have time to explain everything right now, but I promise you, I promise. I'm coming back tomorrow, and I'm taking you away from here. Can you be brave until then?" The boy's small hand reached out and touched her face, just once, gently. Then he withdrew to his corner. Eleanor had to force herself to stand, to walk away. Every step toward the wagon felt like betrayal. Behind her, she could feel Benjamin watching. In the wagon, heading back toward town, Eleanor couldn't speak. Rage and grief warred in her throat. "We'll get the money," Caleb said finally. "I have some saved, Lydia too, and maybe Bennett. It won't be enough." Eleanor's voice was flat. "We'd need to raise $300 by tomorrow. That's impossible." "Then what do we do?" Eleanor was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "We go to Harold Pierce, and we make him pay." The ride back to Millbrook felt twice as long as the journey out. Eleanor sat rigid in the wagon seat, her mind calculating impossible mathematics. $300 by noon tomorrow. She had $37 left after giving Reeves his deposit. Caleb might have $50 saved, Lydia perhaps another $30. That left them nearly $200 short, and she knew of no bank that would loan money to an unmarried woman with no collateral and no reputation in town, which left only one option, however distasteful. "Take me to Pierce's farm," she said as they entered Millbrook's outskirts. Caleb's hands tightened on the reins. "Eleanor, that's not a good idea. The man threatened you this morning." "I don't care. He created this situation. He sold his son to that monster. The least he can do is help buy him back." "You think he'll just hand over $300? No, but I think he might be persuaded. Eleanor's voice was cold. He wanted a wife to make him look respectable. Right now, word is spreading through town about what I said in that church. His reputation is already damaged. I can make it much worse. Caleb studied her face, then nodded slowly. I'm coming in with you. I won't argue. Pierce's farm lay 3 miles west of town, accessed by a narrow road that cut through bare fields. The house was larger than Eleanor expected, a 2-story structure that had once been well maintained but now showed signs of neglect. Paint peeled from the shutters, the porch steps sagged, and weeds grew thick in what had probably been a kitchen garden. This was what happened, Eleanor thought, when a man destroyed his own family. Everything rotted from the inside out. Harold Pierce emerged from the barn as they pulled into the yard. He wore work clothes stained with mud, and his face was flushed with anger or drink or both. I told you to stay away from my children, he called out. Eleanor climbed down from the wagon before Caleb could help her. We need to talk. Inside. I've got nothing to say to you. Then you can listen. Eleanor walked toward the house. Because I've just come from Jacob Reeves's farm, and I've seen what your youngest son is living through. You're going to help me fix it. Something flickered across Harold's face. Guilt, perhaps, or fear. He glanced at Caleb, who'd positioned himself protectively near Eleanor, then gestured roughly toward the house. The interior was worse than the exterior. Dishes piled in the sink, clothes scattered across furniture, dust thick on every surface. This was a house where children had once lived. Eleanor could see evidence of them everywhere. A wooden top on the mantel, a child's drawing tacked to the wall, a row of small coats hanging by the door waiting for owners who would never return. Say what you came to say. Harold didn't offer them seats. Benjamin is being abused, Eleanor said flatly. Reeves has him working like a farmhand despite being 4 years old. The boy has bruises on his arms and his hands are scraped raw. He's living in a barn, sleeping on dirty straw. This is what you sold him into. Harold's jaw worked. Reeves said he'd provide proper care. The contract specified, the contract is worthless if Reeves doesn't honor it, and clearly he doesn't. Eleanor stepped closer. I've offered to buy back Benjamin's contract. Reeves wants $500. I've given him $200 as a deposit, which leaves me $300 short. Money I need by tomorrow noon or that child stays in that hell you created. I don't have $300, Harold said immediately. That's why why the contracts were necessary in the first place. Then sell something. This farm, your equipment, I don't care what. Your son's life is worth more than your land. The farm's already mortgaged. Everything's mortgaged. And even if I could raise the money, why should I give it to you? You're nobody. You have no claim on my children. Eleanor's control cracked. I have more claim than you do. You forfeited any right to call yourself their father when you signed them away. Those children needed you to protect them, and instead you traded them for poker debts and whiskey money. You're not a father. You're just a man who should have been one. Harold's face went dark red. You don't know anything about what I've been through. Mary died and left me with 7 children and a failing farm and debts I couldn't pay. I did what I had to do to survive. You did what was easiest. There's a difference. Eleanor forced her voice level again. But I didn't come here to debate your choices. I came for $300. You're going to give it to me one way or another. And if I refuse? Then I go to every newspaper in Kansas Territory and I tell them the story of Harold Pierce, who sold his children like livestock and tried to trick a mail-order bride into legitimizing his actions. I'll make sure every person in this state knows what you did. You think your reputation is damaged now? I'll destroy what's left of it. You'd ruin yourself too, Harold pointed out. A woman making accusations like that, refusing to honor a marriage agreement, you think anyone will take you seriously? I don't care about my reputation. I care about 7 children who are suffering because of you. Eleanor pulled a folded paper from her pocket. Samuel Bennett drew this up this afternoon. It's a legal demand for restitution. You advertised for a wife under false pretenses. I answered that advertisement and incurred considerable expense traveling here. If you don't cooperate, I'll sue you for fraud. Bennett says I have an excellent case. Harold snatched his paper and scanned it, his expression growing darker. This is extortion. No, extortion is what Jacob Reeves is doing, charging $500 for a contract he paid $150 for. This is justice. I'm giving you a choice, Mr. Pierce. Help me save your son, or face the consequences of your actions in court and in public opinion." The silence stretched. Through the window, Eleanor could see the sun starting its descent toward evening. Tomorrow noon felt simultaneously too far away and terrifyingly close. "Even if I wanted to help," Harold said finally, "I told you, I don't have the money. Everything I owned went to paying off the most dangerous debts. The rest," he gestured vaguely, "the contracts took care of the rest." "Then tell me who holds the other contracts," Eleanor said. "Give me names, locations, terms. If I can't save Benjamin through you, maybe I can save him by negotiating better terms with whoever has the other children. Someone might accept a lower price or be willing to work out payments." Harold laughed bitterly. "You think they'll negotiate with you? Most of those men bought those contracts as investments. They're making money off my children's labor. They're not going to give that up out of kindness." "Maybe not, but I have to try." Something in her voice must have reached him, because Harold's expression shifted. He walked to a desk in the corner and pulled out a folder of papers. "The contracts. I kept copies. Probably should have burned them, but—" He trailed off. Eleanor took the folder with hands that trembled slightly. Inside were 7 contracts, each detailing the terms under which one of Harold's children had been bound out. The language was cold, legal, reducing human lives to labor hours and monetary value. Thomas Pierce, age 14, to the Blackwood Mining Company. 5 years working as a pit boy. Compensation to Harold Pierce, $200. Margaret Pierce, age 13, to the household of Robert and Constance Walsh. 4 years performing domestic service. Compensation, $175. John Pierce, age 11, to the Barton Cattle Ranch. 6 years working as a ranch hand. Compensation, $150. James Pierce, age 11, to the Crawford Wheat Farm. 6 years field labor. Compensation, $150. Sarah Pierce, age 8, to the Prospect Textile Mill. 5 years, mill work. Compensation, $125. Daniel Pierce, age 6, to the Morrison Roadside Inn. 5 years, general labor. Compensation, $100. Benjamin Pierce, age 4, to Jacob Reeves. 5 years, farm work. Compensation, $150. Eleanor did the mathematics. Harold had sold 7 children for a total of $1,150. Enough to pay his gambling debts and probably enough left over to drink himself into a stupor for a few months. "May I keep these?" she asked. "Why?" "Because I'm going to buy back every single one of these contracts, and these copies will help me prove the original terms." Harold studied her face. "You're serious? You really think you can get them all back?" "I know I can." Eleanor met his eyes. "The only question is whether you're going to help or hinder me. If I help you recover the children, what then? They come back here to me?" "Absolutely not." Eleanor's voice was steel. "You'll never have authority over them again. I'll petition for guardianship. Bennett says we have grounds, especially if we can document abuse or neglect in the contract placements. So you take my children and my farm and everything. You already gave away your children, Mr. Pierce. I'm just making it permanent. And as for the farm, I don't want it. Sell it, keep it, lose it to the bank. I don't care. All I want is those 7 children safe and together." Harold was quiet for a long moment. Then he walked to a cabinet, pulled out a bottle, and took a long drink. "Mary would have done the same thing," he said finally. "If she were alive, she'd have fought for them like you're fighting. She'd have never let this happen in the first place." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even close. But it was the first time Harold had acknowledged his own failure. "I can't give you $300, he continued, "but I can give you this." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. Inside were bills and coins that Eleanor quickly counted. $120. "It's all I have left," Harold said. "I was saving it for spring planting, but—" He shrugged. "Seeds don't matter if I can't live with myself." Eleanor took the money. It wasn't nearly enough, but combined with her remaining $37 and whatever Caleb and Lydia could contribute, it brought them closer. She tucked the pouch and the contracts folder under her arm. "Thank you," she said, though the words tasted strange. "Don't thank me, just—" Harold looked away. "Benjamin, when you get him back, tell him his father is sorry, even if he doesn't understand yet. Tell him someday." Eleanor didn't promise. She simply turned and walked out, Caleb following close behind. In the wagon, Caleb counted the money. 157 total now, between this and what you had left. Still need about 220 more, and that's assuming Lydia and I can scrape together 70 or 80. "I know." Eleanor's mind was already racing ahead. "Take me to the bank. Maybe they'll—" "Eleanor, the bank's closed. It's past 5. "Then take me to whoever runs it. I don't care if I have to wake the banker at home. I need to try." But trying proved futile. The banker, a pompous man named Weatherby, whom Caleb roused from his dinner, listened to Eleanor's request with barely concealed disdain. Alone to an unmarried woman with no property, no employment, and no male relative to guarantee it? Absurd. He practically laughed her out of his parlor. Back at the hotel, Lydia was waiting with coffee and worry. "Any luck?" "Some. Not enough." Eleanor explained about the money from Harold and the banker's refusal. "How much can you spare?" Lydia and Caleb exchanged glances. $73, Lydia said. "It's our emergency savings, but this qualifies as an emergency." Eleanor did the math. $230. Still $70 short, with no clear way to raise it by noon tomorrow. "What about Bennett?" Caleb suggested. "Could he loan it?" "I'll ask, but I doubt he has much either. Young lawyers barely scraping by themselves." Eleanor pressed her hands to her face. "We're so close. $70. It might as well be 7,000. "There's one other option," Lydia said quietly. "The church takes up collections for families in need. If we went to Reverend Matthews tonight, explained the situation, he was the one preparing to perform my wedding to Harold," Eleanor interrupted. "If he was willing to marry me to that man, he's not going to help me fight him." "Not Matthews, then, but there are other churches, other congregations, some of the women's groups." Eleanor shook her head. "Even if they wanted to help, they'd never collect $70 in one night. And I can't risk word getting back to Harold, or worse, to Reeves. If Reeves finds out I'm scrambling for money, he might raise his price again." They sat in dejected silence. Outside, full darkness had fallen. Somewhere 20 miles north, a 4-year-old boy was probably being ordered to bed in that freezing barn, wondering if the woman who'd visited him was real or just another dream. "I could steal it," Caleb said suddenly. "What?" "Harold has to have more money somewhere, or valuables. I could go back tonight, break in—" "No." Eleanor's voice was firm. "We do this legally or not at all. If we break the law, we lose any moral authority to challenge Harold's actions. We become criminals, and everything we're trying to do falls apart." "So we just give up?" Caleb's frustration was evident. "Let that child stay with Reeves?" "I didn't say that." Eleanor stood, pacing to the window. Her reflection stared back at her, a woman alone, facing an impossible situation, just like every other woman who'd ever tried to fight a system designed to exclude her. But she wasn't alone. Not really. Lydia and Caleb had risked their own stability to help her. Samuel Bennett had taken her case knowing he might not see payment for months. Even Harold, despicable as he was, had given her his last dollars. Sometimes strength wasn't about having enough. It was about being willing to use everything you had. "My mother left me a brooch," she said slowly, "when she died. It was her mother's before that, sterling silver with a garnet center. I was supposed to sell it years ago when money got tight, but I couldn't. It was the only thing I had left of her." "Eleanor, no," Lydia said. "You can't. How much would it bring?" Eleanor turned. "If I sold it tonight, how much?" "Maybe $40, $50. But Eleanor, that's your inheritance. My inheritance is worth less than a child's life." Eleanor pulled the brooch from her bag. A beautiful piece, the silver worked into delicate flowers around the deep red stone. Her mother had worn it every Sunday. "Where can I sell it tonight?" "The general store might buy it," Caleb said reluctantly. "Old man Patterson deals in jewelry sometimes, resells it to travelers, but he'll lowball you, especially if he knows you're desperate." Then we don't tell him I'm desperate. Eleanor pinned the brooch to her collar. We tell him I'm a woman of means who's simply liquidating assets. Can you help me? 20 minutes later, they stood in Patterson's general store. The old man examined the brooch through a jeweler's loupe, his expression carefully neutral. Sterling silver, decent garnet, probably 1840s workmanship. He set it down. I'll give you 35. It's worth at least 60, Eleanor said calmly, and you know it. Maybe in a city, but this is Millbrook. I'll be lucky to find a buyer at 45. 35 is my final offer. Eleanor picked up the brooch. Then I'll find another buyer. There isn't another buyer in town. Then I'll wait until there is. She turned to leave, praying Patterson would call her back. The seconds stretched. Finally, just as she reached the door, 45. But that's robbery on my end. Eleanor turned back. Done. She left the store with $45 in cash and the ghost of her mother's disapproval weighing on her conscience. But she also left knowing that Benjamin Pierce was $45 closer to freedom. Back at the hotel, they counted everything again. $275. Still 25 short. My watch, Caleb said, unbuckling it from his vest. It was my father's, but it's solid gold. Has to be worth 30. Caleb, I can't ask. You're not asking. I'm offering. He pressed the watch into her hand. That little boy needs it more than I do. By the time Patterson finished examining the watch, full night had settled over Millbrook. The store was stuffy, overheated by a potbelly stove, and Eleanor felt sweat trickling down her back despite the February cold outside. $28, Patterson said finally. Done. $303. They'd done it. Eleanor barely slept that night. She lay in her hotel room watching the window gradually lighten from black to gray to pale gold, and she thought about Benjamin. Was he awake too? Was he afraid? Did he remember her promise? At dawn, she dressed carefully. She needed to look respectable, capable, someone Reeves would have to take seriously. She pinned up her hair, put on her best dress, and wrapped herself in her traveling cloak. In the mirror, she looked like a woman about to attend a business meeting, which she supposed she was. The business of buying back a child. Caleb and Lydia were waiting in the lobby with coffee and sandwiches nobody could eat. They reviewed the plan one more time. Caleb would drive Eleanor to Reeves's farm. Lydia would stay behind and prepare a room at the hotel for Benjamin, a warm space with a soft bed and clean clothes. Samuel Bennett would meet them at the farm at noon with legal documentation for the contract transfer. If something goes wrong, Eleanor said, if Reeves refuses the deal or tries to change the terms. We take Benjamin anyway and sort out the legal mess later, Caleb finished. I know. I brought my rifle just in case. I prefer we didn't need violence. So would I, but I'm not leaving that child there no matter what Reeves says. The ride north felt different from yesterday's journey. Then, Eleanor had been operating on outrage and determination. Now, with the full weight of what she was attempting settling on her shoulders, she felt something closer to terror. What if Reeves refused? What if $300 wasn't enough after all? What if she'd sold her mother's brooch and Caleb had sacrificed his father's watch for nothing? But then she remembered Benjamin's small hand touching her face in that freezing barn, and the fear transformed into resolve. Whatever happened, that child was not spending another night in Jacob Reeves's custody. They reached the farm at 12:45. Bennett's buggy was already there, the young lawyer standing beside it with a leather document case. He looked nervous but determined. Everything's ready, he said as Eleanor climbed down. I've drawn up a contract termination and transfer of custody. Reeves signs it, you pay him, and Benjamin is legally yours. Mine? Well, legally, he'll be transferred to your guardianship pending a full custody hearing, but functionally, yes, yours. Reeves emerged from the house as they approached. He'd made some effort to clean up, shaved, changed his shirt, and Eleanor realized he'd been planning for this moment too, probably counting his money in advance. You brought it? He asked without preamble. Eleanor pulled out the leather pouch and opened it so he could see the bills inside. $300 as agreed. Where's Benjamin? We do the business first. Bennett stepped forward. Mr. Reeves, I'm Samuel Bennett, attorney at law. I've prepared the necessary documents for this transaction. If you'll review and sign here, I don't need a lawyer complicating things." Reeves reached for the money, but Eleanor pulled it back. "We do this properly," she said. "You sign the termination, I pay you, you release Benjamin. That's the deal." Reeves scowled but took the papers Bennett offered. He read them slowly, lips moving, clearly uncomfortable with the legal language. "This says I give up all rights to the contract and can't pursue further compensation." "That's correct," Bennett confirmed. "Once you sign and accept payment, the matter is closed." "And if the boy causes trouble later, if he runs away or gets hurt, that's no longer your concern," Eleanor said. "He'll be my responsibility." Reeves grunted and pulled a pen from his pocket. His signature was barely legible, but it was legal. Bennett witnessed it, then handed Eleanor her own copy. "Now the money," Reeves said. Eleanor counted it out bill by bill, making sure Bennett witnessed every dollar. When Reeves had it all, he recounted it himself, taking his time. Finally satisfied, he pocketed the cash. "Barn," he said, and turned away. They found Benjamin exactly where he'd been yesterday, in the corner, sitting on the straw. But today, his small face lifted when Eleanor entered, and something that might have been hope flickered in his eyes. "Benjamin." Eleanor knelt beside him. "I told you I'd come back. Now we're going to leave this place, and you're never coming back. Do you understand?" The boy nodded slowly. "Can you walk? Are you hurt anywhere?" Benjamin shook his head. He stood up, wobbling slightly, and Eleanor saw how thin he was beneath the oversized clothes. How long had it been since he'd eaten a real meal? "Mr. Reeves," Bennett called toward the barn door. "The contract specified you'd provide adequate food and shelter. This child is clearly malnourished." "He ate what I ate," Reeves shot back. "Not my fault he's picky." Eleanor didn't trust herself to respond. She simply took Benjamin's hand, so small, so cold, and led him toward the door. The boy walked stiffly, as if he'd forgotten how to move freely. Outside, in the February sunlight, Eleanor got her first clear look at him. Dark hair like his father's, but his eyes were different, softer, sadder. The bruises on his arms were worse than she'd realized, purple and yellow mottling his pale skin. His clothes hung on his frame, and his feet were wrapped in rags instead of proper shoes. "Caleb, your coat," Eleanor said urgently. Caleb was already shrugging it off. They wrapped Benjamin in wool twice his size, and the boy disappeared into its folds. Eleanor lifted him. He weighed almost nothing, and carried him to the wagon. "Wait," Reeves called from the porch. "The boy's got belongings, clothes and such." "Keep them," Eleanor said without turning. "He won't need anything from this place." She climbed into the wagon with Benjamin on her lap, and Caleb drove them away from that farm like they were outrunning demons. Maybe they were. Behind them, Jacob Reeves stood on his sagging porch with $300 in his pocket and not a shred of conscience visible on his face. Benjamin didn't speak for the first mile. He sat rigid in Eleanor's arms, the oversized coat wrapped around him, and stared at the passing landscape. Then, very quietly, he said, "Home." Eleanor's throat tightened. "Yes, sweetheart, we're going home." "Papa?" "No, your papa isn't there, but—" Eleanor struggled with how to explain. How did you tell a 4-year-old that his father had abandoned him? "But I'm there, and soon your brothers and sisters will be too. Would you like that?" Benjamin thought about this. "Maggie?" "Yes, Margaret. We're going to find her next, and Thomas, and the twins, and Sarah, and Daniel, all of them." The boy relaxed slightly against her. "Cold," he whispered. "I know, but we'll be in town soon, and there's a warm room waiting for you, with a real bed and blankets and all the food you can eat." Benjamin's eyes drifted closed. Eleanor felt his breathing slow, deepen. The child was asleep before they'd gone another mile, his small body finally surrendering to exhaustion. Lydia was waiting on the hotel porch when they arrived. She took one look at Benjamin and pressed her hand to her mouth. "Oh, that poor baby." They carried him upstairs to the room Lydia had prepared. She'd outdone herself, a fire blazing in the grate, the bed piled with quilts, hot water in the basin, and clean children's clothes laid out on a chair. How she'd found them so quickly, Eleanor didn't know and didn't ask. I'll help you get him cleaned up and fed, Lydia said. Then he needs to sleep properly, in a real bed. It took time. Benjamin woke when they tried to change his clothes and panicked, thrashing weakly until Eleanor gathered him close and spoke softly until he calmed. The bathwater revealed more bruises, more scrapes, and evidence of neglect that made Eleanor's hands shake with fury. But she forced herself to be gentle, to wash him carefully and dress him in clothes that actually fit. Lydia brought up soup and bread, but Benjamin could only manage a few spoonfuls before his stomach rebelled. He wasn't used to real food anymore. Small amounts, Lydia said, often, will build his strength back up slowly. They put him to bed finally, the small boy nearly disappearing under the quilts. He was asleep again within minutes, one hand curled beneath his chin in a gesture of heartbreaking vulnerability. Eleanor stood by the bed and watched him breathe. One child safe. 6 more to go. You did it, Caleb said from the doorway. I honestly didn't think we'd pull it off. We got lucky, Eleanor replied. Reeves was motivated by greed. The others won't all be so simple. No, Bennett agreed, joining them. In fact, I've been reviewing these contracts you got from Pierce. Some of them are going to be very difficult. The mining company that has Thomas, for instance, they won't sell back a 14-year-old boy who can do a man's work. He's too valuable. Then we find another way. Eleanor pulled the folder of contracts from her bag. Tell me everything these documents reveal. They spent the next hour analyzing each contract. Bennett explained the legal nuances, the potential challenges, and the likely costs. By the time they finished, Eleanor understood the enormity of what she'd committed to. Thomas at the mine, probably $1,000 to buy back, if they'd even negotiate. Margaret with the Walsh family, maybe $300, but they'd likely refuse on principle. The twins, $400 each at minimum, and separating them had probably been deliberate to make it harder to recover both. Sarah at the textile mill. The mill employed dozens of children and wouldn't want to set a precedent of selling back contracts. Daniel at the inn. Unknown variables, but at least $200. Total estimated cost, at least $3,000, possibly more. Eleanor had spent nearly everything she had on Benjamin. Even if she could somehow raise more funds, it would take months. I don't have that kind of time, she said. Winter's hard on children in those conditions. Every day matters. Then we prioritize, Bennett suggested. Focus on the youngest first, the ones in the most danger. Daniel's only 6, and we don't know anything about the inn where he is. Maybe check on him next. Assess the situation? Eleanor looked at Benjamin, sleeping peacefully for probably the first time in 6 weeks. She'd saved 1 child, but 6 more were out there waiting. 6 more children who'd gone to sleep tonight, not knowing if anyone was coming for them. Tomorrow, she decided. Tomorrow we go after Daniel, and we keep going until they're all home. Caleb and Bennett exchanged glances. They both knew what Eleanor had just committed to: weeks or months of travel, confrontation, negotiation, and likely heartbreak. But neither of them argued. I'll start researching the Morrison Inn, Bennett said. See what I can learn about the family. And I'll ask around town, Lydia added. Someone might know someone who's been there, can tell us what to expect. After they left, Eleanor sat beside Benjamin's bed and watched the firelight play across his sleeping face. The child looked peaceful now, the lines of fear and pain smoothed away by rest. But she knew the trauma ran deeper than physical neglect. Benjamin had been abandoned by his father and worked like an animal by strangers. Those scars would take time to heal, if they ever healed at all. She thought about the other 6 children. Were they sleeping tonight or working? Were they alone or did they have each other somehow? Did they wonder why no one had come for them? I'm coming, she whispered to the empty room. For all of you, I promise. Outside her window, Millbrook settled into night. Somewhere in the darkness, 6 more children waited for rescue, and Eleanor Whitfield, who'd come west as a mail-order bride, had become something she'd never intended: a crusader. The question was whether her determination would be enough to overcome the money, power, and indifference that stood between her and 7 children who needed someone to fight for them. She'd find out soon enough. Benjamin woke screaming at 2 a.m. Eleanor, who'd been sleeping in a chair beside his bed, jerked awake to find the boy sitting upright, his small body rigid with terror, his eyes wide but unseeing. She moved quickly, gathering him into her arms. You're safe, she murmured, rocking him gently. You're safe now, Benjamin. No one's going to hurt you. The child trembled against her, his breathing ragged. Gradually, his eyes focused. He looked around the warm room, at the dying fire in the grate, at Eleanor's face, and seemed to remember where he was. The screaming stopped, replaced by silent tears that soaked into her nightgown. Want Maggie, he whispered finally. I know, sweetheart. We'll find her. I promise. But even as she made the promise, Eleanor felt its weight. Margaret was 13, old enough to understand what had happened to her family, old enough to have lost hope. And according to the contract, she was working for the Walsh family in Salina, people with a reputation for cruelty. Getting her back wouldn't be as simple as paying money. Eleanor held Benjamin until he fell asleep again, his small hand clutching her sleeve. She stayed in the chair, unable to return to her own room, watching over him as the night slowly gave way to dawn. By the time pale light filtered through the window, she'd made her decision. Daniel was 6 years old and potentially in danger at the Morrison Inn, but Margaret was 13 and already breaking. They'd go after her first. At breakfast, she explained her reasoning to Lydia and Caleb. Benjamin sat on her lap, eating scrambled eggs with the focused intensity of a child who'd learned not to waste food. He wouldn't let Eleanor more than a few inches away from him. Salina's 40 miles east, Caleb said. We could reach it by evening if we left now. What about Benjamin? Lydia asked. He's not strong enough to travel. Eleanor had considered this. He stays here with you. I'll be gone 2 days at most. You can care for him? Of course, but Eleanor, he's barely started trusting you. If you leave now, I know. Eleanor smoothed Benjamin's hair. But if Margaret's situation is as bad as we fear, every hour matters. And I can't take a 4-year-old into a potentially hostile situation. Benjamin looked up at her, his dark eyes worried. You come back? The question broke her heart. Yes, sweetheart. I promise I'll come back. And when I do, maybe I'll bring your sister. He considered this, then nodded slowly and returned to his eggs. An hour later, Eleanor and Caleb were on the road to Salina. Bennett had stayed behind to continue researching the other contracts and to keep watch over Benjamin. They'd packed supplies for 2 days and brought every dollar Eleanor could scrape together, barely 100 after buying back Benjamin's contract. It wouldn't be enough if the Walshes demanded serious money, but Eleanor was counting on finding leverage beyond cash. The road east was better maintained than the northern route they'd taken to Reeves's farm. They passed other travelers, freight wagons heading west, and once a stagecoach that thundered past in a cloud of dust. The landscape gradually shifted from empty prairie to more settled farmland, with houses visible in the distance and cultivated fields showing the first hints of spring preparation. Tell me about the Walshes, Eleanor said as they traveled. Caleb's expression darkened. Robert Walsh owns a dry goods store in Salina. He and his wife Constance have 3 young children of their own. They took Margaret on as a housemaid and nanny, supposedly to help Constance manage the household. And the reputation for cruelty? Constance Walsh is known for being particular, demanding. She went through 4 hired girls in 1 year before taking Margaret. The girls who left wouldn't say much, but word gets around. Long hours, harsh punishments for small mistakes, very little food or rest. Why hasn't anyone intervened? Because technically, the girls are employees, not slaves. They can quit anytime. Caleb glanced at her. Except Margaret can't quit. She's bound by contract, and she's only 13. Where would she go even if she could leave? Eleanor felt anger building again, that familiar fury at a system designed to trap the vulnerable. Do the Walshes know why Margaret's contract came up for sale? Do they know her father sold her? Probably, but I doubt they care. To them, she's just cheap labor. They reached Salina as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The town was larger than Millbrook, with a main street lined with shops and businesses, a proper hotel, and even a small theater. Eleanor could see the difference prosperity made. These buildings were well maintained, the streets cleaner, the people better dressed. Walsh's store is on 3rd Street, Caleb said, guiding the wagon through the evening traffic. We should check into the hotel first, get cleaned up. We'll approach them in the morning when we're fresh. But Eleanor was already scanning the storefronts, looking for the Walsh name. Which one is it? Eleanor, it's nearly dark. We should wait. Which one? Caleb sighed and pointed to a two-story building halfway down the block. That one. But the store's probably closed by now. Eleanor didn't care. She climbed down from the wagon and walked toward the store, her travel-stained dress and exhausted face marking her as exactly what she was, a woman who'd been on the road all day and had no patience left for proper protocols. The store was indeed closed, but light showed in the windows of the second floor where the family presumably lived. Eleanor knocked on the store's front door, hard and insistent. After a moment, a curtain twitched upstairs. Then footsteps descended interior stairs, and the door opened to reveal a man in his 40s, well-fed and annoyed. "We're closed. Come back tomorrow." "Mr. Walsh?" Eleanor kept her foot in the door. "My name is Eleanor Whitfield. I've come from Millbrook regarding Margaret Pierce." Walsh's expression shifted from annoyance to wariness. "What about her?" "I'd like to discuss her contract. May I come in?" "It's late. Whatever business you have can wait until morning." "I'd prefer to discuss it now." Eleanor's voice was pleasant but firm. "Unless you'd rather I return with the sheriff and discuss why a 13-year-old girl in your employment appears to be working under conditions that violate territorial labor laws." It was a bluff. Eleanor had no idea if Margaret's conditions violated any laws, but Walsh didn't know that. He studied her face, clearly trying to determine if she was serious, then stepped back. 5 minutes, and make it quick. The store's interior was neat and well-stocked, smelling of coffee and fabric and leather goods. Walsh led her to a small office at the back, not offering a seat. Caleb followed, positioning himself near the door. "Margaret Pierce's contract," Eleanor began. "I want to buy it back." "Not for sale." "I'm prepared to offer—" "I said not for sale. The girl's worth is far more than whatever you're offering. She works hard, causes no trouble, and we paid good money for her contract. We're not interested in selling." Eleanor had expected this. "Mr. Walsh, I should inform you that I'm in the process of recovering all 7 Pierce children from their various contract placements. I've already succeeded with the youngest, Benjamin, and I will succeed with Margaret. The only question is whether we do this the easy way or the difficult way." Walsh crossed his arms. "The difficult way being what exactly?" "A full investigation into Margaret's working conditions, followed by a legal challenge to the contract's validity. Harold Pierce sold his children under false pretenses, claiming they needed discipline and training, when in fact he was simply liquidating assets to pay gambling debts. Several lawyers believe the contracts could be challenged on those grounds." This was only partially true. Bennett thought some contracts might be vulnerable, but he hadn't specifically mentioned Margaret's. But Walsh couldn't know that either. "Even if that's true, it would take months to resolve in court. The girl stays here while the lawyers argue." Walsh moved toward the door. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I want to see her." The words came out harder than Eleanor intended. "Before I leave tonight, I want to see Margaret and confirm she's being treated according to the contract terms." "Absolutely not. It's late. She's probably asleep, and you have no authority." "Then I'll return tomorrow with the territorial marshal." Eleanor was making this up as she went, but desperation made her bold. "I'll explain that I have reason to believe a child is being mistreated, and that you refuse to let me verify her welfare. I'm sure he'll be very interested." Walsh's face reddened. "You're threatening me." "I'm giving you a choice. Let me see Margaret for 5 minutes. Let me confirm she's safe and reasonably well treated, and I'll leave quietly and pursue this through proper legal channels. Refuse, and I'll make enough noise that every territorial official within 50 miles knows the name Robert Walsh and wonders what you're hiding." The silence stretched. Walsh's jaw worked, and Eleanor could see him calculating. Finally, he turned and shouted toward the stairs. "Constance, bring the Pierce girl down." They waited in tense silence. Eleanor heard footsteps overhead, a woman's sharp voice, then lighter footsteps descending. A moment later, a woman appeared in the office doorway. Thin, blonde, with a pinched expression, followed by a girl. Margaret Pierce was taller than Eleanor expected, with dark hair pulled back severely from a face that might have been pretty if it weren't so hollow. She wore a plain gray dress too short for her growing frame, and her hands were red and chapped from hard work. But it was her eyes that struck Eleanor most, old eyes in a young face, eyes that had seen too much and expected nothing good. "This woman wants to ask you some questions," Walsh said to Margaret. "Answer truthfully." Margaret's gaze flicked to Eleanor, then away. "Yes, sir." Eleanor stepped closer, keeping her voice gentle. "Margaret, my name is Eleanor Whitfield. I knew your father. I've come to check on you and your siblings." Something flickered in the girl's expression. Hope, maybe, or fear. "Are you being treated well here?" Eleanor asked. Margaret's eyes darted to Mrs. Walsh, who stood watching with arms crossed. "Yes, ma'am." "Are you getting enough food? Enough rest?" "Yes, ma'am." Eleanor could see the lie in every line of the girl's too thin body, in the shadows under her eyes, in the way she held herself like someone expecting a blow. But with the Walshes watching, Margaret would never admit the truth. "Margaret," Eleanor said quietly, "do you remember Benjamin, your youngest brother?" The girl's composure cracked slightly. Is he all right?" "He is now. I bought back his contract 3 days ago. He's safe in Millbrook, staying at a hotel with a kind woman named Lydia Moore. He's being fed and cared for." Margaret's eyes filled with tears that she blinked back rapidly. "That's good. Thank you for telling me. I'm going to do the same for you," Eleanor continued, ignoring Walsh's angry intake of breath. "I'm going to bring you home to Benjamin. It might take some time, but I promise you, that's enough." Mrs. Walsh stepped forward. "Margaret, go back upstairs. Now." The girl hesitated, looking at Eleanor with an expression of desperate longing. Then she dropped her gaze and whispered, "Yes, ma'am." As Margaret turned to leave, Eleanor saw something that made her blood run cold. The girl's dress had a tear near the shoulder, and through it, Eleanor glimpsed what looked like burn marks on her upper arm. Small, circular burns, the kind a cigarette might make. "Wait," Eleanor said sharply. "Margaret, turn around." "You've seen enough," Walsh said. "Get out of my store." But Eleanor had already moved, gently catching Margaret's arm and pushing up the sleeve. The girl flinched but didn't pull away. There, on her pale skin, were at least half a dozen small circular scars in various stages of healing. "What are these?" Eleanor's voice was deadly quiet. "The girl's clumsy, Mrs." Walsh said quickly. "Always burning herself on the stove." "These aren't stove burns." Eleanor looked at Margaret. "Who did this to you?" The girl's face had gone white. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. "I said get out of my store," Walsh repeated, his voice rising, "before I have you arrested for harassment." Eleanor released Margaret's arm gently. "I'm leaving, but I'm coming back. With the law, with lawyers, with whatever it takes. This isn't over." She walked out, Caleb close behind her. On the street, she had to lean against the wagon for a moment, shaking with fury. "Did you see?" she demanded. "Did you see what they're doing to her?" "I saw." Caleb's voice was grim. "But Eleanor, we have no proof that the Walshes caused those burns. They'll claim exactly what Mrs. Walsh said, that Margaret's accident-prone. That's not accident-prone, that's torture. That's systematic abuse of a child." "I agree, but legally it's their word against ours. And we're strangers while they're established citizens of Salina." Eleanor pressed her hands to her face. "We have to get her out of there, tonight. I don't care about legality anymore. That child is being hurt. If we take her without legal authority, we're kidnappers. The Walshes will have every lawman in the territory after us. We'll lose Margaret and probably Benjamin too when they catch us." "So what do we do?" Eleanor's voice cracked. "Leave her there? Go back to Millbrook knowing that girl is suffering?" "No, we do what we planned. We fight this legally, but we fight it fast." Caleb gripped her shoulder. "Tomorrow morning, we go to the territorial marshal. We file a formal complaint. We demand an investigation. And we make so much noise that the Walshes can't ignore it." Eleanor wanted to argue, wanted to grab Margaret and run. But Caleb was right. Acting rashly would only make things worse. She nodded slowly. "Tomorrow then. First thing." They checked into the Salina Hotel, a nicer establishment than Lydia's place in Millbrook, but Eleanor barely noticed the comfortable room or the clean sheets. She lay awake most of the night thinking about Margaret upstairs in that store, probably working even at this late hour. scrubbing floors or washing dishes or caring for the Walsh children while her own childhood slipped away. At dawn, Eleanor was dressed and downstairs before the dining room even opened. Caleb found her pacing in the lobby. "Did you sleep at all?" he asked. "No. Where's the marshal's office?" 3 blocks north, but Eleanor, they won't open until 8. Then we'll wait outside. The territorial marshal's office was a small building adjacent to the county courthouse. They waited on the steps as the town woke around them, watching shopkeepers open their stores and workers heading to their jobs. At 8 o'clock precisely, a man in his 50s with a marshal's badge pinned to his vest approached. "Help you folks?" Eleanor stood. "Marshal, my name is Eleanor Whitfield. I need to report a case of child abuse." The marshal's expression shifted from polite interest to wariness. "Come inside." His office was cluttered with wanted posters and paperwork, the desk stacked with files. He gestured them to chairs and sat down behind the desk. "Now then, child abuse is a serious accusation. Tell me what you know." Eleanor laid out everything: Harold Pierce's sale of his children, her mission to recover them, and what she'd seen at the Walsh store the previous night. The marshal listened without interrupting, his weathered face impassive. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair. "These burn marks, did you examine them closely?" "Closely enough to know they weren't accidents." "But you're not a doctor. You can't say for certain how they were caused." "Marshal, a 13-year-old girl has cigarette burns on her arms. Whether they're deliberate or not, that child is clearly in an unsafe environment." "The Walshes are respected citizens," the marshal said slowly. "Robert Walsh serves on the town council. His wife is active in the Ladies' Improvement Society. I've never heard a single complaint about them." "Because the people who could complain are either children bound by contracts or former employees who are afraid of retaliation." The marshal steepled his fingers. "Miss Whitfield, I understand your concern. Truly. But I can't investigate every household based on one person's suspicions. If I went around accusing prominent citizens of child abuse without solid evidence, I'd be out of a job within a week." Eleanor felt her control slipping. "So you're saying nothing can be done?" "I'm saying I need more than your word. If you can bring me a doctor's statement confirming abuse, or if the girl herself makes a formal complaint, then I can act. But based on what you've told me, I don't have grounds for an investigation. The girl won't complain because she's terrified. And how am I supposed to get a doctor to examine her when the Walshes won't let anyone near her?" "That's not my problem to solve." The marshal stood, signaling the conversation was over. "My advice? Talk to a lawyer about challenging the contract legally. That's your best option." Outside, Eleanor wanted to scream. Instead, she turned to Caleb. "We need Bennett, now. If the marshal won't help, then we do this through the courts." They left Selena within the hour, pushing the horses harder than was wise on the return journey. Eleanor spent the entire ride composing arguments in her head, planning strategy, trying to figure out how to navigate a legal system designed to protect property rights over children's welfare. They reached Millbrook as dusk was falling. Lydia met them at the hotel door, her face worried. "Eleanor, thank goodness. Benjamin's been asking for you constantly. He barely ate today." Eleanor felt a stab of guilt. She'd been so focused on Margaret that she'd forgotten how fragile Benjamin's trust still was. She hurried upstairs to find the boy sitting on the bed, his small face lighting up when he saw her. "You came back," he said wonderingly. "I told you I would." Eleanor gathered him into her arms. "I'll always come back, Benjamin." "Always." The child clung to her, and Eleanor felt the weight of responsibility settle more heavily on her shoulders. She'd saved one child and now had to keep her promise to 6 others, even as the system threw up barriers at every turn. Bennett arrived within 20 minutes of being summoned. Eleanor explained the situation while Benjamin sat on her lap, listening quietly. "Cigarette burns," Bennett repeated, his expression grim. "That's assault. Criminal assault on a minor. The marshal won't investigate without more evidence. He wants a doctor's statement or a formal complaint from Margaret herself, neither of which we can get as long as she's in the Walsh's custody." Bennett paced the small room. "All right. We approach this differently. I'll file a motion to suspend Margaret's contract pending an investigation into potential abuse. It's a long shot, but if we can get a judge to agree to a temporary removal, we can get her examined by a doctor and build a proper case. How long will that take? A week, maybe 2, to get a hearing scheduled. Then it depends on the judge. That child could be dead in 2 weeks, Eleanor said flatly. I know, but it's the only legal option we have right now. Bennett pulled out his notebook. Unless there is one other possibility. If we could get someone inside that household, someone the Walshes trust, who could document the abuse, you mean like another employee? Exactly. Someone who could witness what's happening to Margaret and provide testimony. That would give us grounds for an emergency removal. Eleanor's mind was already working. Could I apply to work there? As a housemaid, or they'd never hire you, not after last night. Bennett tapped his pen against the notebook. But they might hire someone else. Someone they don't know is connected to you. Who? Caleb asked. Every woman in Millbrook knows about Eleanor's mission by now. What about someone from another town? Lydia suggested. She'd been listening from the doorway. We could put out word in Hutchinson or Junction City, find a woman willing to help. There's no time for that. Eleanor set Benjamin down gently and stood. And we can't trust a stranger anyway. No, it has to be someone we know, someone the Walshes wouldn't connect to me. They looked at each other. Finally, Lydia spoke. It has to be me. Absolutely not, Caleb said immediately. It's too dangerous. I'm the logical choice. I'm respectable. I have experience running a hotel, and the Walshes have never seen me before. Eleanor and Caleb are the only ones they'd recognize. Lydia, if they discover why you're really there, they won't. I'll be careful. Lydia's voice was firm. That girl is being tortured. Someone has to do something. Eleanor wanted to refuse, wanted to protect Lydia from the risk. But she also knew Lydia was right. Time was running out for Margaret, and they needed evidence the law would accept. If we do this, Eleanor said slowly, we plan it carefully. Lydia goes to Selena, presents herself as a widow looking for work, gets hired by the Walshes, and documents everything she sees. At the first sign of danger, she leaves immediately. Agreed? Agreed, Lydia said. I don't like this, Caleb muttered. Neither do I, but we're out of options. Eleanor looked at Bennett. While Lydia's gathering evidence, you file that motion to suspend the contract. We attack from both sides, legal and practical. Bennett nodded. I'll have the motion ready by tomorrow. The plan was set. Lydia would leave for Selena in 2 days, giving them time to prepare her story and create a convincing background. In the meantime, Eleanor would stay in Millbrook with Benjamin, both to care for the boy and to maintain distance from anything that might alert the Walshes. That night, after everyone had left, Eleanor sat with Benjamin in the quiet hotel room. The boy was finally asleep, his breathing deep and even. She thought about Margaret, awake in that store 70 miles away, probably scrubbing floors or folding laundry, her arms marked with burns that no one would officially acknowledge. The system was designed to protect people like the Walshes, respectable, prosperous, connected. It was designed to ignore people like Margaret, young, poor, powerless. Eleanor had known this intellectually, had experienced glimpses of it in her own limited life. But now she was confronting it directly, and the injustice of it threatened to overwhelm her. She thought about the other 5 children still scattered across Kansas. Thomas in a coal mine, probably working 16-hour shifts in darkness and danger. The twins John and James, separated and alone, laboring on farms or ranches. Sarah in a textile mill, her small hands operating machinery that could maim or kill her. Daniel at an inn, doing work no 6-year-old should have to do. 7 children. She'd saved one and had a plan for the second. That left 5 more, and her resources were almost exhausted. She had maybe $50 left after traveling expenses. No realistic way to raise the thousands it would cost to buy back all the contracts. And even if she could somehow get the money, men like the Walshes would fight her just on principle. But giving up wasn't an option. Not when Benjamin slept peacefully because someone had finally fought for him. Not when Margaret waited in that store, still hoping someone would save her. Eleanor made herself a promise in that quiet room. Whatever it took, however long, however difficult, however much she had to sacrifice, she would bring those children home. All 7 of them. The system might be designed to stop her, society might disapprove, the law might obstruct her at every turn. But Eleanor Whitfield had discovered something in herself over the past few days, something she hadn't known was there. She had the capacity for absolute, unshakable determination, and she was just getting Lydia left for Selena on a Wednesday morning, wearing her plainest dress and carrying a small carpet bag that contained nothing to connect her to Eleanor or Millbrook. They'd rehearsed her story until she could recite it without hesitation. She was Lydia Crawford, recently widowed, her husband killed in a threshing accident near Junction City. She needed work and had heard the Walshes might be hiring. "If they hurt you," Caleb said for the 10th time, gripping his sister's hands, "if they so much as threaten you, you leave immediately. Margaret isn't worth your life." "Margaret's life is worth the risk," Lydia replied quietly, "and I'll be careful, I promise." Eleanor handed her an envelope. "Money for the stage and for emergencies, and this." She pressed a small whistle into Lydia's palm. "If you need help urgently, use it. Someone will hear." They watched the stage pull away, carrying Lydia toward danger they couldn't prevent. Benjamin, who'd been clinging to Eleanor's skirt, looked up with worried eyes. "Lady gone?" "Just for a little while," Eleanor told him, though she had no idea if that was true. "She'll be back soon." The next 3 days crawled past with agonizing slowness. Eleanor tried to keep busy caring for Benjamin, who was slowly gaining strength and trust. He still woke screaming most nights, still flinched at sudden movements, but he was eating better and had even smiled once when Eleanor read him a story from a book Lydia had left behind. Bennett filed the motion to suspend Margaret's contract, though he warned it was a formality that would likely be denied. The Walshes had every legal right to keep Margaret, and unless Lydia uncovered irrefutable evidence of abuse, no judge would interfere. On the 4th day, a telegram arrived. Eleanor's hands shook as she opened it. Position secured. Stop. Situation worse than expected. Stop. Will send full report. Soon. Stop L. "She's in," Eleanor told Caleb, who'd been waiting anxiously. "She got hired." "And the situation's worse than expected." Caleb's face was grim. "We should go there. Bring her back." We wait. Lydia knows what she's doing, but Eleanor's stomach was tight with worry. 2 more days passed. Benjamin had his first good night of sleep, waking only once and falling back asleep quickly when Eleanor soothed him. It felt like progress, like proof that children could heal given safety and time. But it also made Eleanor more desperate to reach the others before the damage became permanent. On Saturday, a letter arrived by private courier. Eleanor recognized Lydia's handwriting and tore it open. The words inside made her blood run cold. Eleanor read the letter twice, then handed it to Caleb without speaking. His expression darkened as he read. Lydia had been hired immediately. The Walshes were apparently desperate for help after their previous girl had fled in the night 2 weeks earlier. She'd been given a small room in the attic and told her duties would begin at 4 in the morning and end when Mrs. Walsh dismissed her, usually around 10 at night. Margaret, Lydia wrote, was in worse condition than they'd feared. The burn marks were indeed from cigarettes, inflicted by Mrs. Walsh whenever the girl made a mistake or was too slow. Margaret worked from before dawn until midnight most days, caring for the 3 Walsh children, cooking, cleaning, and doing laundry. She slept in a storage closet off the kitchen and was given only table scraps to eat, whatever the family didn't finish. But the worst revelation was that Robert Walsh had been making inappropriate advances toward Margaret. Nothing overt yet, but enough to terrify the girl. Lydia had overheard him tell his wife that Margaret was developing nicely and would be worth the investment in a few years. Eleanor felt sick. She folded the letter carefully and looked at Caleb. "We're getting her out. Tonight." "Eleanor, if we—" "Tonight." Her voice left no room for argument. "I don't care about the law anymore. I don't care about contracts or property rights or any of it. That child is in immediate danger, and I will not leave her there one more day." Caleb studied her face, then nodded slowly. "All right. Then we need a plan that doesn't get us all arrested." They spent the next hour strategizing. Bennett joined them, initially opposed to anything illegal, but gradually convinced by the urgency of the situation. Finally, they had something that might work. Caleb would drive to Selena with Eleanor and Benjamin. They'd arrive after dark and wait near the Walsh store. Lydia would create a distraction, A kitchen fire, small enough to control but alarming enough to draw the family's attention. In the chaos, Eleanor would slip in through the back door, grab Margaret, and get her into the wagon. They'd be miles away before the Walshes realized what had happened. It was risky, possibly illegal, and could fail in a dozen ways. But it was the only option that got Margaret out tonight. "What about the other children?" Bennett asked. "If you do this, the Walshes will raise hell. Every lawman in Kansas will be looking for you. It'll make it nearly impossible to negotiate for the others." Eleanor had considered this. "Then we move fast. We get Margaret tonight, then go straight for Daniel tomorrow. He's closest, only 30 miles west at that inn. If we can secure both of them quickly, we'll have 2 children safe before the law catches up with us. And if it doesn't work? Then at least Margaret and Benjamin are safe. The rest..." Eleanor's voice caught. "The rest we'll figure out as we go." They left Millbrook at sunset, Benjamin bundled in blankets on Eleanor's lap. The boy sensed the tension and stayed unusually quiet, his dark eyes watchful. As they traveled through the gathering darkness, Eleanor told him about his sister. "Margaret is kind and brave," she said softly. "She took care of you when you were a baby. Do you remember her at all?" Benjamin's forehead wrinkled in concentration. "Maggie sang," he said finally. "When scared." "That's right. She used to sing to you." Eleanor's heart ached. "Tonight we're going to bring her home. Would you like that?" The boy nodded solemnly. "Maggie, come home." They reached Salina well after dark, approaching from the south to avoid the main streets. Caleb parked the wagon in an alley 2 blocks from the Walsh store, positioning it for a quick escape. Eleanor could see lights burning in the store's upper windows where the family lived. "You stay here with Benjamin," Eleanor told Caleb. If something goes wrong, I'm coming in after you." Caleb checked his rifle. "Lydia's in there too. I'm not losing both of you." Eleanor nodded and slipped out of the wagon. She moved through the shadows toward the store's rear entrance, her heart pounding. According to Lydia's letter, the back door would be unlocked. The Walshes were careless about security, arrogant in their assumption that no one would dare challenge them. She waited in the darkness behind a stack of crates, watching the upper windows. Somewhere inside, Lydia was preparing to start a small fire in the kitchen, just enough smoke to trigger panic and draw everyone's attention. Margaret would be working somewhere in that house, probably scrubbing floors or washing dishes, unaware that rescue was minutes away. Eleanor thought about all the ways this could fail. The Walshes might not react to the fire as expected. Margaret might be locked in somewhere. Lydia might be discovered. They might all end up arrested or worse. But doing nothing was no longer an option. Eleanor had learned something crucial over the past 2 weeks, that sometimes the only moral choice was the illegal one, that sometimes you had to break unjust laws to serve actual justice. A sharp whistle pierced the night, Lydia's signal. Eleanor tensed, ready to move. Suddenly, a woman's scream came from inside the building. "Fire! Robert, there's a fire in the kitchen!" Footsteps thundered overhead, more shouts. Eleanor saw figures moving past the windows, shadows cast by firelight. This was it. She ran to the back door and tried the handle. Locked. Lydia had said it would be unlocked, but either the Walshes had changed their habits or something had gone wrong. Eleanor looked around desperately, spotted a window slightly ajar, and pried it open wide enough to squeeze through. She found herself in a storage room stacked with dry goods. Smoke drifted through the doorway, not thick, but alarming enough. She could hear the chaos upstairs, Robert Walsh shouting orders, his wife's shrill voice, children crying, and underneath it all, Lydia's voice calling for water. Eleanor moved through the storage room to the kitchen. It was empty, the source of the smoke apparently upstairs. She took the servants' stairs 2 at a time, emerging into a hallway thick with smoke. Through it, she could see the Walsh family clustered around a small fire in what looked like a linen closet. Lydia was directing them, keeping them focused away from the rest of the house. Eleanor moved in the opposite direction, checking rooms, a parlor, a dining room, the children's bedroom, all empty. Where was Margaret? Then she heard it, a soft sound from behind a door at the end of the hall. Not quite crying, more like someone trying very hard not to cry. Eleanor opened the door to find a storage closet barely large enough for one person. Margaret sat inside, knees drawn up to her chest, her thin body shaking. "Margaret," Eleanor whispered. It's Eleanor Whitfield. We met last week. I've come to take you to Benjamin." The girl's head snapped up. In the dim light from the hallway, Eleanor could see fresh bruises on her face and more burns on her arms. Whatever had happened in the past week had been bad. "You can't," Margaret whispered. "They'll catch us. They'll hurt you." "Let them try." Eleanor held out her hand. "Benjamin is waiting in a wagon 2 blocks from here. We're leaving Selena tonight, and you're coming with us. But we have to go now, while they're distracted." Margaret stared at Eleanor's outstretched hand like it was a miracle she was afraid to touch. Then, slowly, she reached out and took it. Eleanor pulled the girl to her feet. Margaret was taller than Benjamin, but just as painfully thin, her gray dress hanging off her frame. She moved stiffly, as if everything hurt. "Can you run?" Eleanor asked. "I think so." "Then run." They moved back down the hallway, away from the smoke and chaos. Eleanor could hear Robert Walsh cursing now, the fire apparently under control. They had minutes at most before someone noticed Margaret was missing. They reached the servants' stairs and descended quickly. Eleanor paused at the bottom, listening. No sounds from the storage room or kitchen. She led Margaret to the window she'd come through, helped the girl climb out first, then followed. Outside, the night air felt shockingly cold and clean after the smoke-filled house. Eleanor grabbed Margaret's hand and ran, pulling her through the darkness toward the alley where Caleb waited. Behind them, a shout. "The girl! Where's the Pierce girl?" "Run faster," Eleanor gasped. They burst into the alley. Caleb saw them coming and had the wagon moving before they even reached it. Eleanor practically threw Margaret into the back, then scrambled up herself. Caleb snapped the reins, and the horses surged forward. "What about Lydia?" Eleanor shouted over the noise of the wagon. "She'll slip out during the confusion. She knows where to meet us." They careened through Selena's streets, taking corners too fast, the wagon wheels sliding on loose dirt. Benjamin, who'd been silent throughout, suddenly spoke. "Maggie?" Margaret, breathing hard and pressed against the wagon's side, looked at the small boy. Her face transformed, grief and joy mixing in an expression that made Eleanor's throat tight. "Benjamin?" Margaret's voice broke. "Is it really you?" The boy held out his arms, and Margaret pulled him close, burying her face in his hair. They clung to each other while the wagon raced through the darkness, 2 of 7 siblings reunited against all odds. Eleanor heard shouts behind them, the Walshes organizing pursuit. But Caleb knew these streets, and he drove like a man possessed. They hit the town's outskirts and kept going, pushing the horses harder than was safe, putting distance between themselves and Selena. After 20 minutes of hard riding, Caleb finally slowed the horses to a more sustainable pace. They were on a little-used road heading west, no lights visible behind them. "Did they follow?" Eleanor asked. "Not yet, but they will. Walsh will have the marshal after us by morning." Eleanor didn't care. She looked at Margaret and Benjamin huddled together in the wagon bed, the girl still holding her little brother like she'd never let go. They'd done it. 2 children safe, even if it meant becoming fugitives. "Where's the meeting point for Lydia?" she asked. "There's an old barn 5 miles west of town. She'll head there once she gets clear." They reached the barn an hour later, a dilapidated structure that looked ready to collapse but provided shelter from the cold. Caleb guided the wagon inside, and they waited in the darkness, listening for pursuit or for Lydia's arrival. Margaret hadn't spoken since that first moment of recognizing Benjamin. She sat with the boy in her arms, rocking slightly, her eyes unfocused. Eleanor recognized the signs of shock. "Margaret," she said gently, "can you tell me what happened? Did they hurt you after I visited?" The girl's eyes focused slowly. "Mrs. Walsh was angry. She said I'd made them look bad. She—" Margaret touched the bruises on her face. "It doesn't matter now." "It matters. What they did was wrong. Lots of things are wrong. Children get sold, mothers die, fathers drink away everything and don't care who gets hurt." Margaret's voice was flat, emotionless. "That's just how things are." "No," Eleanor said firmly. "That's how things have been. But I'm going to change it. For you, for Benjamin, for all your siblings. You're never going back there, Margaret. Never." The girl looked at her with those 2 old eyes. "You can't promise that. They have the law on their side. Then I'll break the law. I already have. Eleanor moved closer. Margaret, I need you to understand something. I didn't come west to become a criminal or a fugitive. I came here to find a family, to finally have a home. But what I found instead was 7 children who needed someone to fight for them. So that's what I'm doing, and I won't stop until all 7 of you are safe. 5, Margaret corrected quietly. You have me and Benjamin. That leaves 5 more. Then we go after Daniel next. He's the youngest after Benjamin, only 6 years old, working at the Morrison Inn. If we can reach him tomorrow— The Morrison Inn? Margaret's face went pale. Eleanor, no, not there. Why? What do you know about it? Before Papa sold us, I heard him talking to the man who came to arrange the contracts. The Morrison Inn was one of the places, but Papa argued about it, said he wouldn't send Daniel there, that he'd heard stories. The man said those were just rumors, that the Morrisons paid good money. Margaret's voice dropped to a whisper. But Papa had nightmares after. I heard him crying in his room one night, saying Daniel's name. Eleanor felt cold dread settling in her stomach. What kind of stories? I don't know exactly, but the man mentioned children who'd worked there before. Some had run away. One— Margaret stopped, shaking her head. One what? One died, but the man said it was an accident, that the child had been sickly anyway. Eleanor and Caleb exchanged looks. If Daniel was in immediate danger, they couldn't wait. They'd have to go to the Morrison Inn as soon as possible, fugitives or not. A soft sound from outside made them all freeze. Caleb raised his rifle, positioning himself between the women and the barn door. Footsteps approached, then stopped. It's me, Lydia's voice called quietly. Don't shoot. She slipped inside, her dress smoke-stained, her hair disheveled, but otherwise unharmed. Caleb lowered the rifle and pulled his sister into a fierce embrace. They suspect anything? He asked. Not yet. The fire was small enough that they got it under control quickly. I made sure to be helpful and concerned. When things calmed down, I excused myself to my room, waited 20 minutes, then climbed out the window and ran. Lydia looked at Margaret. You're safe now. I'm so glad. Margaret managed a small nod. Benjamin, who'd been quiet throughout, chose that moment to speak. Everyone safe now? Eleanor wished she could say yes, but 5 children were still out there. Thomas in a coal mine, the twins on separate farms, Sarah in a textile mill, and Daniel in a place even Harold Pierce had been afraid to send him. Not everyone yet, she told Benjamin honestly, but we're working on it. They stayed in the barn until dawn, taking turns keeping watch. When gray light finally filtered through the gaps in the walls, Caleb assessed their situation. The Walshes will have reported Margaret missing by now. The marshal will be organizing a search, and they'll be watching the roads. We can't go back to Millbrook. That's the first place they'll look. Then we go to the Morrison Inn, Eleanor said. We're already fugitives. Might as well make it count by saving another child. Eleanor, if what Margaret says is true, that place is dangerous. We can't just walk in and ask to buy Daniel's contract. Then we don't ask. We take him, just like we took Margaret. And if anyone tries to stop us— Eleanor's voice hardened. They'll have to go through me first. Bennett would be furious when he found out what they'd done, Eleanor knew. They'd destroyed any legal standing they might have had. But looking at Margaret and Benjamin huddled together, finally reunited, she couldn't regret it. These children had been traded away like furniture, worked until they broke, and hurt by people who should have protected them. If the law wouldn't help them, then Eleanor would work outside the law. The Morrison Inn was 30 miles west, according to the contracts Harold had given her. They could reach it by afternoon if they pushed hard. Eleanor wanted to get there before word of Margaret's rescue spread too far, before the Morrisons were on alert. They left the barn at full sunrise, following back roads and farm tracks that kept them away from main thoroughfares. Margaret sat with Benjamin, the boy nestled against her side, both of them exhausted but together. Lydia divided her emergency money among them all. If they got separated, each person would have funds to survive. Around noon, they stopped to rest the horses and eat the supplies Lydia had packed. Margaret ate slowly, as if her stomach had forgotten how to handle real food. Eleanor noticed the girl kept touching Benjamin, as if confirming he was real. Margaret, Eleanor said carefully, What else do you know about your siblings? Where they are, what they're doing? The girl thought for a moment. Thomas was working with Papa on the farm before everything happened. He was trying to hold things together after Mama died. Papa resented him for it, said Thomas made him feel worthless. When the contracts were arranged, Papa made sure Thomas went somewhere he'd break. The coal mine was deliberate. Eleanor's fists clenched. Harold Pierce's cruelty ran deeper than she'd realized. The twins, John and James, they were inseparable, Margaret continued. Papa sold them to different places on purpose. Said they'd never learn independence otherwise. Sarah was only 8, but she was bright. Loved numbers. Papa said the textile mill would teach her discipline. The girl's voice went flat. I think he just wanted us all to hurt like he was hurting. And Daniel? Margaret pulled Benjamin closer. Daniel was Mama's baby. She spoiled him, Papa said. After she died, Daniel cried all the time. Papa couldn't stand it. The Morrison Inn was... I think Papa wanted Daniel far enough away that he wouldn't have to hear him crying anymore. Eleanor felt sick. This wasn't a father making hard choices during difficult times. This was a man deliberately punishing his children for the crime of needing him after their mother died. We'll get them all back, Eleanor promised. Every single one. How? Margaret asked. You saved me and Benjamin by breaking the law. You can't do that 6 more times. Eventually someone will stop you. Then I'll find another way. Eleanor met the girl's eyes. Margaret, I made a promise. To you, to Benjamin, to your siblings. I'm not the kind of person who breaks promises. They reached the Morrison Inn as the sun began its descent toward evening. The place sat at a crossroads where 2 dusty trails met, a 2-story wooden structure with a stable, a main building, and several outbuildings. Smoke rose from the chimney, and Eleanor could see wagons in the yard, travelers stopping for the night. What's the plan? Caleb asked. Eleanor had been thinking about this for the past 10 miles. They couldn't use the same approach they'd used for Margaret. The Morrisons wouldn't be distracted by a kitchen fire, and they couldn't count on Daniel being easy to find. We go in as travelers, she decided. A family heading west, looking for a meal and possibly lodging. We pay for a room, we observe, and we figure out where Daniel is. Then tonight, when everyone's asleep, we take him. And if we can't find him, then we ask questions until we do. They pulled into the inn's yard as other travelers were arriving for the evening. A man emerged from the main building, middle-aged, heavy-set, with a cold expression that made Eleanor's instincts scream warnings. Help you folks? He called. Caleb climbed down from the wagon. Looking for lodging for the night. We've been traveling from Junction City. The man's eyes swept over them. Caleb, Eleanor, Margaret, Benjamin, and Lydia. His gaze lingered on the children. I'm Frank Morrison, run this place with my wife. We've got 2 rooms available. Dinner's extra. We'll take 1 room, Eleanor said, stepping forward. And dinner for all of us. Morrison's attention fixed on her. You the mother? Yes. The lie came easily. These are my children. Something flickered in Morrison's expression. Calculation, maybe, or suspicion. But he named a price, and Caleb paid it. Morrison gestured toward the stable. Put your horses there. Samuel will see to them. Then come inside and I'll show you to your room. They did as instructed, though Eleanor noticed Morrison watching them the entire time. She also noticed there were no other children visible, no one playing in the yard, no one helping with chores. In a busy inn, that seemed wrong. The interior of the Morrison Inn was dim and smelled of old cooking grease and unwashed bodies. The main room served as both tavern and dining area, with rough tables and chairs scattered around. A few travelers sat drinking, but the atmosphere felt oppressive rather than convivial. Morrison led them upstairs to a small room with 2 beds and a window overlooking the yard. Dinner's at 6. Don't be late. After he left, Eleanor immediately went to the window and studied the layout of the property. The outbuildings included what looked like a workshop, a smokehouse, and a small structure that might be servants' quarters. Daniel's probably in one of those buildings, she whispered to Caleb, working or locked up somewhere. We can't search them all without being noticed. Then we ask, carefully. Eleanor turned to Margaret. You and Benjamin stay here with Lydia. Don't open the door for anyone. Caleb and I will go down to dinner and see what we can learn. Dinner was a grim affair, watery stew and hard bread served by a woman who must be Mrs. Morrison. She was as cold as her husband, moving through the room without speaking except to take orders. Eleanor watched her carefully, looking for any sign of warmth or humanity. She found none. After forcing down the tasteless stew, Eleanor caught Mrs. Morrison's attention. "Excuse me, ma'am. I noticed you don't seem to have any help. A busy inn like this, surely you need servants?" Mrs. Morrison's face closed off. "We manage. I only ask because I'm looking for work for my oldest son when we settle out west. Thought perhaps you might need a strong boy." "We don't hire." Mrs. Morrison turned away, but Eleanor had seen it, the flash of something in the woman's eyes when Eleanor mentioned a boy. Fear? Guilt? Whatever it was, it confirmed Daniel was here. Back upstairs, Eleanor relayed what she'd observed. "He's here somewhere. I'm sure of it. We'll wait until midnight, then search the outbuildings." The hours crawled past. Benjamin fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the journey. Margaret stayed awake, keeping watch by the window. Lydia dozed fitfully in a chair. Around 11, the sounds from downstairs finally quieted as the last travelers headed to their rooms. At midnight, Eleanor and Caleb slipped out of the room and down the back stairs. The kitchen was dark, the fire banked for the night. They moved through it silently and out into the yard. The moon was bright enough to see by, but not so bright they'd be easily visible. Eleanor headed for the small structure she'd identified as possible servants' quarters. The door was locked, but she could see a faint light through a crack in the boards. "Someone's in there," she whispered. Caleb examined the lock. "It's padlocked from the outside. Whoever's in there is locked in." Eleanor felt her heart rate spike. "Can you break it?" "Not quietly." Caleb looked around and spotted a tool shed. "Wait here." He returned moments later with a heavy file. Working carefully, he began filing through the padlock's shackle. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the quiet night, metal on metal scraping and grinding. Eleanor kept watch, certain someone would hear and investigate. After 10 agonizing minutes, the shackle gave way. Caleb pulled the padlock free and opened the door. The smell hit them first. Unwashed bodies, sickness, and human waste. Eleanor's eyes adjusted to the dim interior, lit only by a single candle stub. What she saw made her stomach turn. 3 children sat huddled on a dirt floor. 2 were older, perhaps 10 or 11, their faces hollow and their clothes filthy. The third was smaller, dark-haired, his thin body curled into a ball. "Daniel?" Eleanor whispered. The small boy's head lifted slowly. His face was bruised and one eye was swollen shut. But his features were recognizable from the family resemblance. He looked like Benjamin, only slightly older and far more damaged. "Daniel Pierce?" Eleanor tried again, stepping closer. The boy flinched violently. "I'm sorry," he said automatically. "I'll work harder. Please don't hit me again." Eleanor felt tears burning her eyes. She forced them back and knelt slowly, making herself small and unthreatening. "Daniel, my name is Eleanor. I'm a friend of Margaret's. We've come to take you home to your sister and brother. Will you come with us?" Daniel stared at her with disbelieving eyes. "Maggie." "Yes. She's waiting for you right now, just upstairs in this building. And Benjamin, too. They want to see you." "Benjamin's here?" For the first time, something like hope flickered across Daniel's face. "He is, but we have to leave quickly, before the Morrisons wake up. Can you walk?" Daniel tried to stand and immediately stumbled. Caleb caught him. "I've got him," Caleb said grimly, lifting the boy into his arms. Eleanor looked at the other 2 children. "You should come too, all of you." But the older children shook their heads, retreating into the shadows. "They'll catch us," one whispered. "They always catch runners. It's worse when you run." "Not this time," Eleanor promised. But she knew she couldn't force them, and they didn't have time to argue. Every moment they stayed increased the risk of discovery. They carried Daniel across the yard and back into the inn. Eleanor's heart hammered as they climbed the stairs, certain someone would appear and stop them. But the building stayed silent, and they made it back to their room without incident. Margaret gasped when she saw Daniel. "Oh, Danny!" She gathered him close, even as the boy's bruised body protested. "What did they do to you?" "Hurt," was all Daniel could say. Everything hurts. Benjamin woke and stared at his brother with wide eyes. Danny? He said tentatively. Daniel's head turned toward the voice. Despite his injuries, he smiled. Benji, you're really here. I'm here. We all need to leave, Caleb said urgently. Now, before someone realizes he's missing. They gathered their few belongings and moved quickly down the back stairs. The wagon was still in the stable. The horses rested enough to travel. Caleb worked efficiently, harnessing them, while Eleanor helped settle the children in the wagon bed. They were pulling out of the yard when a shout came from the inn. Stop! Thieves! Someone's stealing a child! Caleb whipped the horses into a gallop. Behind them, Eleanor could see lights blazing to life in the inn, figures spilling into the yard. But they had a head start, and the Morrison horses would take time to saddle. They raced through the darkness, taking turns blind, the wagon bouncing dangerously over ruts and stones. In the back, Eleanor held all three children, Benjamin, Margaret, and Daniel, while Lydia braced herself against the wagon's side. After an hour of hard riding, Caleb finally slowed the horses. No lights showed behind them. They'd escaped again. We can't keep doing this, he said, breathing hard. Every time we take a child, we make more enemies. Eventually, our luck will run out. I know, Eleanor replied. But what choice do we have? Leave Daniel in that place? Leave Thomas in the mine, the twins on those farms, Sarah in the mill? They're children, Caleb. Children who've already been abandoned once by their father. I won't abandon them again. Then we need a better plan, because running from county to county with stolen children isn't sustainable. Eleanor knew he was right, but looking at Daniel's battered face, at Margaret's protective embrace of her brothers, she also knew she'd do it all again. 3 children safe now, 4 more to go. And somewhere in Kansas, 4 siblings waited, not knowing rescue was coming, but hoping anyway. Eleanor would find them. However long it took, however many laws she had to break, however many enemies she had to make. She'd find them, and she'd bring them home. They couldn't return to Millbrook. By morning, word would spread across Kansas territory. A woman and her accomplices had stolen 3 children from their legal guardians. The Walshes would press charges, the Morrisons would demand justice, and every lawman would be watching for a wagon carrying 3 dark-haired children. Eleanor understood this as they traveled through the pre-dawn darkness, putting distance between themselves and the Morrison Inn. She understood, too, that her original plan, carefully negotiating each contract, working through legal channels, maintaining respectability, was dead. She was a fugitive now, and the 4 remaining Pierce children were still scattered and suffering. We need somewhere safe, Lydia said as gray light began touching the horizon. Somewhere to regroup and care for these children properly. Daniel had fallen into a fevered sleep in Eleanor's arms, his small body burning hot. Margaret held Benjamin close, her eyes hollow with exhaustion. They all needed rest, food, and medical attention. But where could they go that wouldn't immediately turn them over to authorities? I know a place, Caleb said quietly. About 40 miles north, near the Nebraska border. There's a settlement of homesteaders, mostly people who've had their own troubles with the law or with powerful men. They don't ask questions and they don't much care for territorial marshals. Can we trust them? Eleanor asked. As much as we can trust anyone right now. My father knew some of the families there. They remember the Moore name. It was the best option they had. Eleanor nodded and Caleb turned the horses north. They traveled through the day, avoiding main roads and stopping only to rest the horses and check on Daniel. The boy's fever was worsening, and Eleanor grew increasingly worried. Whatever the Morrisons had done to him had left him seriously injured. He needs a doctor, Margaret said, her voice tight with fear. Eleanor, he's getting worse. I know. Eleanor bathed Daniel's forehead with water from their canteen, but it did little good. We'll find help as soon as we can. Benjamin watched his brother with frightened eyes. Danny's sick? He'll be all right, Margaret told him, though her expression said she wasn't sure. They reached the settlement late that afternoon, a collection of rough cabins and homesteads spread across a valley where the Kansas prairie began yielding to different terrain. Caleb drove directly to the largest cabin, where smoke rose from the chimney. A woman emerged as they approached, tall, gray-haired, with the weathered face of someone who'd survived hard years. She studied them with sharp eyes, taking in the exhausted adults and sick children. "Caleb Moore," she said finally. "Heard you settled down in Millbrook. What brings you back north?" "Trouble, Mrs. Hendricks, the kind that needs discretion." The woman's gaze moved to Eleanor and the children. Something in her face softened. "Bring them inside. Looks like that little one needs tending." The cabin's interior was simple but clean, warmed by a large fireplace. Mrs. Hendricks directed them to lay Daniel on a bed in the corner, then examined him with practiced hands. "Broken ribs, maybe internal bleeding," she said grimly. "And this fever suggests infection. What happened to him?" "He was being held at the Morrison Inn," Eleanor said. "We found him locked in an outbuilding with other children, all of them in terrible condition." Mrs. Hendricks' expression darkened. "I've heard stories about that place. Nothing proven, but enough rumors to keep decent folk away." She began cleaning Daniel's wounds. "This child needs proper medical care. I can do some, but—" "Do whatever you can," Eleanor interrupted. "We can't risk taking him to a regular doctor. They'd report us immediately." "Figured as much. You folks on the run?" "We're trying to save 7 children who were sold by their father," Caleb explained. "We've recovered 3. The rest are still out there." Mrs. Hendricks worked in silence for a moment, then called toward another room. "Jacob, bring my medicine kit and some clean bandages." A man appeared, Mrs. Hendricks's husband, Eleanor assumed, and handed over the supplies without question. This was clearly a household that knew when not to ask for details. Over the next hour, Mrs. Hendricks cleaned and dressed Daniel's wounds, gave him medicine for the fever, and made him as comfortable as possible. Benjamin and Margaret never left his side, their small family knitting back together despite everything trying to tear them apart. "He'll need days of rest and careful nursing," Mrs. Hendricks said finally. "But he should recover. The child's tougher than he looks." Eleanor felt tears of relief threatening. "Thank you. I don't know how to repay—" "Don't need repayment. Just need you to tell me the truth. Those other 4 children you're after, where are they?" Eleanor explained about Thomas in the coal mine, the twins on separate farms, and Sarah in the textile mill. She laid out the contracts Harold Pierce had signed, the impossible amounts of money needed to buy them back, and the legal obstacles they faced. Mrs. Hendricks listened carefully, then stood and walked to the window. "Caleb, do you remember the Johansson brothers? The ones who helped Father when the bank tried to take our land?" "Same ones. They work at the Blackwood Mining Company now. Been there about 3 years. If Thomas Pierce is in those mines, they might be able to help." She turned back to Eleanor. "As for the others, there are people in this settlement who've had their own run-ins with powerful folks. People who understand what it's like when the law protects the wrong people. Let me make some inquiries." Eleanor wanted to protest that they'd already put this family at enough risk, but the words wouldn't come. They needed help desperately, and Mrs. Hendricks was offering exactly what they required: connections, knowledge, and the willingness to work outside official channels. "Why would you help us?" she asked instead. Mrs. Hendricks' face grew distant. "Because 20 years ago, my sister's children were taken from her by a man with money and lawyers and the law on his side. She fought for years to get them back, but she died before she could. I've regretted not helping her fight every day since." She looked at Eleanor directly. "I won't make that mistake twice." Over the next 3 days, as Daniel slowly recovered and the children rested, Mrs. Hendricks worked quietly. She sent messages to contacts across Kansas, asked careful questions, and gradually assembled information about the 4 remaining Pierce children. The news was mixed. Thomas was indeed at the Blackwood Mining Company, working pit shifts that no 14-year-old should endure. But the Johansson brothers had confirmed he was alive and, by mining standards, relatively safe. They thought they could arrange for Thomas to disappear during a shift change if Eleanor could provide somewhere for him to go. The twins were on farms 50 miles apart. John at the Barton Cattle Ranch and James at the Crawford Wheat Farm. Both were being worked hard but weren't in immediate danger. The challenge would be coordinating their simultaneous rescue so neither employer could alert the other. Sarah was the most worrying. The Prospect Textile Mill employed dozens of children in conditions that regularly resulted in injuries and deaths. An 8-year-old girl would be particularly vulnerable to the dangerous machinery. "We need to move fast," Eleanor said on the 4th day. as they gathered around Mrs. Hendricks's table to plan. Daniel was sitting up now, still weak but healing. Margaret and Benjamin rarely left his side, the three youngest Pierce children forming their own protective unit. Fast might not be fast enough, Mrs. Hendricks replied. Word's spreading about what you did at the Walsh place and the Morrison Inn. The territorial government is getting involved. They're offering a reward for information leading to your arrest. Eleanor had expected this, but hearing it confirmed still made her stomach drop. How much? $50. Not a fortune, but enough to tempt some folks. Then we have to finish this before someone decides to collect. Eleanor looked at the map Mrs. Hendricks had drawn, showing the locations of all 4 remaining children. Caleb and I will go after Thomas at the mine. Lydia, can you coordinate with the Johansson brothers? I can try, but Eleanor, if you're caught at that mine, they won't just arrest you. Mining companies have their own security, and they don't much care about legal niceties. I'll be careful. Eleanor turned to Mrs. Hendricks. The twins. Is there anyone here who could help retrieve them? My sons might be willing. They're good men, know how to handle themselves. But you're asking people to risk their freedom, their livelihoods. What can you offer them? Nothing, Eleanor admitted, except the knowledge that they helped save children who couldn't save themselves. Mrs. Hendricks smiled grimly. That might be enough. Let me talk to them. The plan came together over the next day. The Johansson brothers would smuggle Thomas out of the mine during a shift change, making it look like he'd been killed in a cave-in. Mrs. Hendricks' sons would ride to the 2 farms simultaneously, using forged paperwork claiming the twins' contracts had been purchased by a mining company further west. If all went well, they'd have the boys away before either employer realized the deception. That left Sarah. The textile mill was the most dangerous target because it operated around the clock with hundreds of workers and tight security. Simply walking in and taking her wasn't an option. I could get hired there, Lydia suggested, like I did at the Walsh place. Work a few days, figure out where Sarah is kept, then— No, Caleb said flatly. You're not putting yourself at risk again. Then what's your suggestion? We can't leave her there. They argued for hours, cycling through and discarding plans. Finally, Margaret spoke up. I could go. Everyone turned to look at the girl. She sat straighter, her thin shoulders squared with determination that reminded Eleanor painfully of what this child should have been: brave, capable, strong, if life hadn't tried so hard to break her. Margaret, you're 13, Eleanor said gently. I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. Margaret's voice was steady. Sarah's my sister. She was only 8 when Papa sold her, probably scared out of her mind. If someone's going to bring her home, it should be family. It's too dangerous. More dangerous than what Sarah's living through every day. More dangerous than what Daniel survived? Margaret shook her head. I know mills. I know how they work. I could get hired as a spinner or a doffer, work alongside Sarah, gain her trust, then take her out during a shift change when security's lighter. Eleanor wanted to refuse, but looking at Margaret's face, she saw the same determination she'd felt herself when she decided to fight for these children. The girl needed this, needed to be someone's rescuer instead of someone who needed rescuing. If we do this, Eleanor said slowly, we do it carefully. You go in with a cover story we've practiced. You find Sarah, but you don't move until we've worked out a safe extraction. And at the first sign of serious danger, you leave. Agreed? Margaret nodded. Agreed. They spent 2 more days preparing. Mrs. Hendricks arranged papers for Margaret under a false name. They practiced her story until she could recite it without hesitation. She was Margaret Collins, 15 years old, orphaned, desperate for work. The age lie was necessary. Mills rarely hired girls under 14. On the morning of departure, Benjamin clutched Margaret's skirt and wouldn't let go. Don't leave, he pleaded. Stay here. Margaret knelt beside him. I'm going to bring Sarah home. Remember Sarah? She used to braid your hair and tell you stories. Sarah gone, Benjamin said sadly. Not for long. I'll find her, just like Eleanor found us. And when I come back, we'll all be together. Can you be brave until then? The boy nodded reluctantly. Daniel, still recovering but stronger each day, reached out and squeezed his sister's hand. Be careful, Maggie. I will. They split up that afternoon. Margaret headed south toward Prospect with Lydia as her escort, the two women disguised as travelers passing through. Eleanor and Caleb rode east toward the Blackwood Mining Company, carrying forged documents claiming Thomas's contract had been sold to a railroad construction company. Mrs. Hendricks's sons rode out in opposite directions to collect the twins. Eleanor felt the separation keenly as she watched Margaret's small figure disappear down the road. She was trusting a 13-year-old girl to infiltrate a dangerous factory and rescue her 8-year-old sister. It went against every protective instinct Eleanor had developed over the past weeks. But Margaret had insisted, and Eleanor understood why. The girl needed to prove, to herself and to her siblings, that she was strong enough to protect them now. The Blackwood Mining Company sat in a valley carved out by years of excavation, the earth scarred and broken. Wooden structures clustered around the main shaft, and Eleanor could see workers moving between buildings, men and boys, all of them coal-blackened and exhausted-looking. "The Johansen brothers will meet us at that building," Caleb said, pointing to a supply shed on the edge of the compound. "They said to wait until evening shift change, then they'll bring Thomas out." The hours until evening crawled past with agonizing slowness. Eleanor and Caleb stayed hidden in a grove of trees, watching the mine operate. She saw boys Thomas's age hauling coal cars that must have weighed more than they did. She saw men emerge from the shaft coughing and limping, and she understood why Harold Pierce had sent his eldest son here, because this place was designed to break strong men, and it would absolutely break a 14-year-old boy. As the sun descended toward the horizon, workers began emerging from the mine shaft for the shift change. Eleanor studied each face, looking for Thomas. She'd seen him only in a photograph Margaret carried, a serious boy with dark eyes and his mother's gentle features. But after weeks in this mine, he might look completely different. Two men approached their hiding place, broad-shouldered miners with kind faces beneath the coal dust. The Johansen brothers, Eleanor assumed. "You the woman asking about Thomas Pierce?" the older one asked quietly. "I am. Eleanor Whitfield. Is he all right?" "Alive. Not much more than that. Boy shouldn't be down there. No 14-year-old should, but the foreman doesn't care as long as the work gets done." The man glanced back toward the mine. "We've got him waiting in the tool shed. There's a gap in the fence behind it where he can slip through. But you'll need to move fast. They take roll after shift change, and when Thomas doesn't show up, they'll start looking." Eleanor nodded. "We're ready." The Johansen brothers led them around the perimeter of the compound, staying in shadows and avoiding the security patrols. At the tool shed, the older brother knocked twice, paused, then knocked once more. The door cracked open. A boy peered out, and Eleanor's heart clenched. Thomas Pierce barely looked human. His face was gaunt, his body skeletal beneath clothes that hung on his frame. His eyes were hollow, and his hands were scarred and bleeding from working with sharp tools and rough coal. But he was alive. "Thomas," Eleanor whispered, "I'm Eleanor Whitfield. Your sister Margaret sent me. We're taking you home." The boy stared at her with disbelieving eyes. "Margaret, she's alive. She's alive and safe. And so are Benjamin and Daniel. They're waiting for you." Thomas's face crumpled. He'd been holding himself together through sheer will, Eleanor realized, and her words had shattered his control. The younger Johansen brother caught him as he stumbled. "No time for reunions yet," the man said gently. "Get him out of here. We'll cover his disappearance as long as we can." They moved quickly through the gap in the fence and into the trees where they'd left the wagon. Thomas collapsed onto the wagon bed, his body giving out now that escape was possible. Eleanor covered him with blankets and gave him water, which he drank desperately. "Benjamin," he gasped between gulps. "He's really safe?" "He is. I bought back his contract and got him away from the man who was hurting him. He's with Mrs. Hendricks now, being cared for properly." "And Margaret and Daniel?" "Margaret's on a mission right now. She's gone to rescue Sarah from the textile mill. Daniel's recovering from injuries he got at the Morrison Inn. But he's healing, Thomas. They're all healing." The boy's eyes closed. "I thought I'd never see them again. Papa said we were better off separated, that we'd poisoned each other with our weakness." His voice broke. "I tried so hard to be strong. I tried to keep us together after Mama died, but Papa wouldn't, he couldn't." "None of this is your fault," Eleanor said firmly. Your father made terrible choices, and you and your siblings paid the price. But that's over now. You're never going back to that mine." They traveled through the night, putting distance between themselves and the mining company. By dawn, they were back at the Hendricks settlement, where Mrs. Hendricks took one look at Thomas and immediately set about feeding him and treating his injuries. Benjamin and Daniel stared at their oldest brother with awe. Thomas looked at them with tears streaming down his face, unable to speak. They sat together in silence, three brothers reunited, while Eleanor watched and prayed that Margaret and the twins would be just as successful. Mrs. Hendricks's sons returned 2 days later with John and James Pierce. The twins looked so alike that Eleanor had trouble telling them apart. Both sandy-haired, both thin but not emaciated, both with the same wary expressions. They'd been separated for nearly 2 months, and they clung to each other with desperate relief. "The Crawford farm wasn't too bad," James said as Mrs. Hendricks examined them for injuries. "The farmer worked me hard, but he fed me decent and never beat me. The cattle ranch was rougher," John admitted. "The ranch hands didn't like having a kid around, said I was useless. But I learned fast, did what they told me." He looked at his twin. "But I missed you every day, every single day." "Same," James whispered. 5 children safe now. Eleanor felt the weight of success and the growing pressure to complete the mission. Margaret and Sarah were still out there, and every day increased the risk of discovery. Word arrived on the 3rd day. A message from Lydia, brief and coded. "Package secured. Coming home." Eleanor's relief was so intense she had to sit down. They'd done it. Margaret had found Sarah and gotten her out. They arrived the next afternoon, Lydia driving the wagon with Margaret beside her, and a small girl hidden under blankets in the back. Sarah Pierce was tiny for 8 years old, her dark hair cut short, her hands bandaged from mill machinery injuries. But her eyes were bright and sharp, taking in everything around her with quick intelligence. "You're Eleanor," Sarah said immediately upon seeing her. "Margaret told me about you. She said you're saving all of us." "Your sister saved you," Eleanor corrected. "I just helped." "Margaret says you're brave and fierce and don't let anyone push you around." Sarah's voice was matter-of-fact. "She says you're going to make Papa sorry for what he did." Eleanor looked at Margaret, who shrugged slightly. "I might have mentioned that we're also planning to pursue legal action." The Pierce siblings were together for the first time in 8 weeks. Eleanor watched them navigate the reunion, tentative at first, then gradually warming. Thomas naturally fell into the role of protective older brother. Margaret mothered the younger ones. The twins stuck close to each other but slowly opened up to their siblings. Daniel, still healing, accepted comfort from all of them. Benjamin, the youngest, simply glowed with happiness at being surrounded by family. But Sarah, Eleanor noticed, stayed slightly apart. The girl watched her siblings with affection, but also with a certain wariness, as if she wasn't quite ready to trust that this was permanent. "Sarah," Eleanor said gently that evening, sitting beside the girl. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine." Sarah's voice was guarded. "Thank you for organizing all this." "You don't have to be fine, after what you've been through. The mill wasn't that bad." Sarah cut her off. "Some of the other children had it worse. I was fast and careful, so I didn't get hurt much. And I learned things about machinery, about how factories work, about efficiency and production." She looked at Eleanor directly. "I learned that if you're smart and observant, you can survive almost anything." Eleanor heard what Sarah wasn't saying, that the girl had armored herself with intelligence and careful behavior, that she'd survived by becoming useful and invisible. It was a different kind of damage than what the others had suffered, but damage nonetheless. "You don't have to just survive anymore," Eleanor said softly. "You can live now. Really live." Sarah's careful mask cracked slightly. "For how long? Until the marshals find us? Until someone turns us in for that reward money? Until Papa comes back and—" "Your father will never have authority over you again," Eleanor interrupted. "I'm going to make sure of that." "How? He's our legal father. The law gives him rights." "Then we change what the law says about his rights." Eleanor pulled out papers she'd been preparing with Bennett's help via messages. "I'm petitioning the territorial court for permanent guardianship of all 7 of you. The grounds are abandonment, abuse, and unfitness as a parent. Bennett thinks we have a strong case, especially now that we can present all 7 of you together, and document what was done to you. Sarah studied the papers with an intelligence far beyond her 8 years. This could take months, and it might not work. It might not, Eleanor agreed, but I'm going to fight anyway, because you deserve a life where you're not constantly afraid, where you can go to school and learn and grow up safe. All of you deserve that. The girl was quiet for a long moment. Then very softly she said, Margaret told me you came to Kansas to get married, that you answered an advertisement from our father. That's true. So you came here expecting a family, and instead you found us. Broken pieces of a family that someone threw away. Sarah looked up at Eleanor with eyes far too old. Why didn't you just go back to Boston? Why did you stay and fight for children you didn't even know? Eleanor had asked herself this question many times over the past weeks. She thought about the easy answers, that it was the right thing to do, that someone had to help, that she couldn't walk away from injustice. All of those were true, but the deeper truth was more complicated. Because I know what it's like to be powerless, she said finally. I've spent my entire adult life dependent on other people's charity, working in other people's houses, living by other people's rules. I came west because I was tired of being invisible, of having no control over my own life. And when I got here and learned what had happened to you and your siblings, I realized I had a choice. I could walk away and return to being invisible, or I could fight and finally matter, finally make a difference in the world. She touched Sarah's hand gently. You gave me a purpose, Sarah. All of you did. I didn't save you. You saved me. Sarah's eyes filled with tears she'd probably been holding back for months. Will you really keep us? All 7 of us? If the court approves my guardianship petition, yes. And even if they don't, I'll keep fighting until I find a way. You're my family now, all of you. The girl finally broke, throwing her arms around Eleanor and sobbing with the kind of desperate relief that came from months of holding everything inside. Eleanor held her, this brilliant child who'd survived through intelligence and careful self-control, and let her cry herself empty. The legal battle, Eleanor knew, was just beginning. Harold Pierce would fight the guardianship petition. The people who'd held the contracts would demand compensation for their losses. The territorial government would want answers about how 7 children had been kidnapped from their legal placements. It would be months of hearings, testimonies, and uncertainty. But Eleanor had something now she hadn't had when she first stepped off that train in Millbrook. 7 children who needed her, friends willing to risk everything to help, and absolute clarity about what she was fighting for. Samuel Bennett arrived at the Hendricks settlement a week later, bringing news both good and concerning. The guardianship petition had been filed and assigned to Judge Harrison, known for being fair but strict about legal procedures. The hearing was set for 6 weeks from now, giving Bennett time to prepare their case, but also giving the opposition time to organize. Harold Pierce has hired a lawyer, Bennett reported. Clayton Morse, out of Topeka. He's expensive and effective, which means someone's funding Pierce's defense. Who? Eleanor asked. My guess? The mining company, possibly the Walshes, maybe others who see this case as a threat to the entire contract labor system. If you win guardianship, it sets a precedent. Other parents who sold their children might face challenges. Other children in similar situations might seek freedom. Bennett looked at the 7 Pierce children, who were listening quietly. You're not just fighting for these 7 anymore, Eleanor. You're fighting for every child trapped in this system. The weight of that responsibility should have been crushing. Instead, Eleanor felt it settle onto her shoulders like armor. If her fight could help other children escape situations like what the Pierce siblings had endured, then she'd fight even harder. The 6 weeks before the hearing were spent preparing. Bennett interviewed each child, documenting their experiences in careful detail. Mrs. Hendricks found a doctor willing to examine them and provide medical testimony about their injuries and malnutrition. Caleb and Lydia tracked down former employees of the Walsh household and the Morrison Inn, people willing to testify about conditions children faced in those places. Eleanor worked with the children themselves, helping them heal and preparing them for the possibility that they might need to testify. Thomas, as the oldest, was the most articulate about their father's deterioration after their mother's death. Margaret could speak to the abuse she'd suffered at the Walsh house. Daniel, though still traumatized, was able to describe the Morrison Inn's horrors in simple, heartbreaking terms. The younger three wouldn't be required to testify. Bennett said it would be too traumatic, and judges rarely allowed it anyway. But their mere presence, healthy and safe with Eleanor, would speak volumes. Harold Pierce showed up at the settlement 3 weeks before the hearing. Eleanor was hanging laundry when she saw him riding up the road, and her first instinct was to gather the children and hide them. But Thomas, who'd been chopping wood nearby, spotted his father and went very still. "It's him," the boy said quietly. "That's Papa." The other children emerged from the cabin, drawn by something they must have sensed. They stood together, all 7 of them, watching their father approach. Eleanor positioned herself in front of them, protective. Harold climbed down from his horse slowly. He looked worse than when Eleanor had seen him last, thinner, grayer, worn down by something more than just age. He stared at his children with an expression Eleanor couldn't quite read. "I need to talk to them," he said. "No." Eleanor's voice was flat. "You gave up that right. They're my children." "They were your children until you sold them. Now they're under my protection, and you're not coming near them." Harold's face twisted. "You think you're saving them? You're just making everything harder. The law is on my side, Miss Whitfield. I'm their father. The court will return them to me, and then where will you be?" "We'll be in that courtroom, presenting evidence of exactly what you did. Every bruise, every burn, every night these children spent terrified and alone because you chose gambling debts over their welfare." Eleanor took a step forward. "You wanted to speak to them? Here's your chance. Tell them why you did it. Explain to Benjamin why you sent him to a man who beat him. Tell Margaret why you sold her to people who tortured her. Make Daniel understand why you chose an inn with a reputation for dead children over keeping him safe. I'd love to hear your justification." Harold's jaw worked. Behind Eleanor, she felt the children pressing closer together, a united front against the man who'd betrayed them. Finally, Thomas spoke. "Why, Papa?" His voice was steady but full of pain. "Why couldn't you just try? After Mama died, we tried so hard to help. We worked, we managed the house, we took care of each other. All you had to do was let us. Instead, you drank and gambled and blamed us for everything. And when your debts came due, you threw us away like we meant nothing." "You don't understand," Harold said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Then explain it." Margaret stepped forward to stand beside Thomas. "Explain it so we can understand why our father chose strangers over his own children." Harold looked at his children, really looked at them, perhaps for the first time since their mother had died. Whatever he saw in their faces made him flinch. "Mary would have known what to do," he said finally. "After she died, I couldn't figure out how to keep going. Every time I looked at you, I saw her. It hurt too much." "So you made us hurt instead," Sarah said, her 8-year-old voice cutting through his excuses. "That's what you did. You were hurting, so you hurt us worse and called it necessary." Harold had no answer. He stood there in the dirt road facing the children he destroyed and seemed to finally understand what he'd done. Eleanor saw something break in his face. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for whatever that's worth now. I'm sorry." "It's worth nothing," Thomas said, "because sorry doesn't undo those weeks in the mine. Sorry doesn't heal Margaret's burns or Daniel's broken ribs or any of it. Sorry is just a word, Papa, and words are all you ever gave us, words and broken promises and excuses." Harold looked at Eleanor. "Take care of them. Better than I did. That's all I can ask now." "I don't need your permission," Eleanor replied. "But I'll care for them anyway, because unlike you, I understand that love means sacrifice, real sacrifice, not the kind where you sacrifice others to avoid discomfort." Harold climbed back on his horse. He looked at his children one last time, then rode away. Eleanor watched him go and felt an odd mixture of pity and contempt. Harold Pierce had had everything: a wife who loved him, 7 healthy children, a working farm, and he'd destroyed it all through weakness and selfishness. She couldn't forgive that, but she could understand it, and understanding brought its own kind of peace. "Is he coming back?" Benjamin asked quietly. "No, sweetheart, he's not coming back." "Good," the boy said simply. The hearing took place on a warm day in late April, in a courthouse in Topeka that smelled of old wood and legal documents. Eleanor wore her best dress, borrowed from Mrs. Hendricks. The 7 Pierce children sat in the front row, clean and well-dressed, thanks to donations from the settlement families. They looked healthy now, though the scars, both visible and invisible, would take much longer to heal. Judge Harrison was a man in his 60s with intelligent eyes and a face that suggested he'd heard every excuse and lie the legal system could produce. He listened to the opening arguments with careful attention. Clayton Morse, Harold's lawyer, argued that a father's rights were absolute under territorial law, that Eleanor Whitfield had no legal standing to challenge a father's decisions about his children, that the children had been placed in legal labor contracts that she had violated through theft and kidnapping. He painted Eleanor as a dangerous radical who was undermining the very foundations of family law and property rights. Bennett countered with evidence, medical records showing the children's injuries, testimonies from former Walsh employees and from the doctor who'd examined Daniel after the Morrison Inn. The contracts themselves, which Bennett argued constituted criminal child abandonment masquerading as legal labor agreements. And finally, testimony from the children themselves. Thomas spoke first, describing life with his father after his mother's death and the steady deterioration that led to their being sold. His testimony was calm and factual, devastating in its clarity. Margaret came next. She showed the court her burn scars and described the Walsh household's systematic abuse. Several people in the courtroom gasped when she rolled up her sleeve. Daniel's testimony was shorter, but no less powerful. The boy described being locked in that outbuilding at the Morrison Inn, the hunger, the fear, the other children who'd been there longer and had given up hope of rescue. When the children finished, Judge Harrison asked Eleanor to testify. She stood before the court and told the truth. All of it. How she'd come to Kansas expecting marriage and found betrayal instead. How she'd made the choice to fight for 7 children she didn't know. How she'd spent every dollar she owned, broken laws she'd never imagined breaking, and become a fugitive in the name of saving lives that the law apparently didn't value. Miss Whitfield, Judge Harrison said when she finished, you understand that what you've described amounts to multiple criminal offenses? Theft, kidnapping, fraud? I understand, and I'd do it all again. Even knowing it could cost you your freedom? Eleanor looked at the 7 children in the front row, 7 faces watching her with hope and trust and love. Your Honor, I spent 26 years of my life with no freedom that mattered. I lived in other people's houses, followed other people's rules, existed at other people's pleasure. Coming west and fighting for these children gave me real freedom for the first time, the freedom that comes from having a purpose worth sacrificing for. So yes, even knowing the consequences, I'd do it all again. Because some things matter more than personal safety or legal technicalities. Family matters more. Love matters more. These children matter more. The courtroom was silent. Judge Harrison studied Eleanor for a long moment, then looked at the children, then at Harold Pierce, who sat in the back looking broken and small. This court will recess for deliberation, Harrison said finally. We'll reconvene in 1 hour with a decision. That hour felt like a lifetime. Eleanor sat with the children in a small room adjacent to the courtroom, trying to keep them calm while her own stomach churned with anxiety. They'd presented the best case possible, but judges were unpredictable, and the law wasn't always just. When they were called back, the courtroom was packed. Word had spread about the case, and people had come to witness the outcome. Eleanor saw Mrs. Hendricks in the crowd, and Caleb and Lydia, and even some of the Johansson brothers. A community had formed around these children, Eleanor realized. People who believed their lives mattered. Judge Harrison took his seat and shuffled papers for a moment. Then he looked up. This is one of the most unusual cases I've encountered in 30 years on the bench. We have a father who, by his own admission, sold his children into labor contracts that resulted in documented abuse. We have 7 children who were rescued from those situations through means that were technically illegal but morally justifiable. And we have a woman who has taken responsibility for these children despite having no legal obligation to do so. He paused, and Eleanor's heart hammered. The law is clear about parental rights. Under normal circumstances, Harold Pierce would retain custody of his children regardless of his past actions. However, these are not normal circumstances. The evidence presented shows a pattern of deliberate child endangerment that goes beyond simple negligence. Mr. Pierce didn't just fail to protect his children. He actively placed them in situations he knew or should have known were dangerous. Judge Harrison looked directly at Harold. Mr. Pierce, I'm terminating your parental rights effective immediately. You will have no further legal authority over these children, no visitation rights, and no claim to their welfare or futures. This decision is permanent and non-appealable. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Harold's lawyer started to object, but Harrison silenced him with a look. As for Miss Whitfield, the judge continued, I'm granting her petition for legal guardianship of all 7 Pierce children. However, this guardianship comes with conditions. First, you will cooperate fully with territorial authorities in their investigation of the mining company, the Walsh household, the Morrison Inn, and any other parties involved in child labor contract abuse. Second, you will establish a permanent residence in Kansas Territory where these children can be raised properly. Third, you will submit to annual reviews by this court to ensure the children's welfare. Eleanor could barely breathe. Your Honor, I accept all conditions. Furthermore, Harrison said, regarding the criminal complaints filed against you for theft and kidnapping, I'm dismissing all charges. Your actions, while technically illegal, were necessary to prevent ongoing harm to minors. No jury in this territory would convict you, and I won't waste the court's time trying. The courtroom erupted in applause. Eleanor felt her knees go weak with relief. Behind her, she heard the children crying, good tears this time, tears of joy and release. Judge Harrison banged his gavel for quiet. One final matter, Mr. Pierce. You claimed poverty prevented you from caring for your children, yet you somehow found funds to hire an expensive lawyer for this case. Who paid Clayton Morse's fees? Harold's lawyer stood. Your Honor, attorney-client privilege is waived when it involves potential conspiracy to exploit children. Answer the question, Mr. Morse. The lawyer's face went red. The Blackwood Mining Company provided the funds. They have a vested interest in maintaining the legality of labor contracts. I see. Then let the record show that the Blackwood Mining Company attempted to use the legal system to maintain custody of a child for their commercial benefit. I'm recommending a full territorial investigation into their labor practices. Harrison looked at Eleanor. Miss Whitfield, if you have documentation about other children in similar situations, I encourage you to bring it to the authorities. This case may be over, but the larger fight isn't. When they emerged from the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. Some were reporters, some were families who'd heard about the case, and some were just curious onlookers. Eleanor tried to shield the children from the attention, but Thomas stopped her. Let them see us, he said quietly. Let them see 7 children who were saved because someone cared enough to fight. Maybe it'll inspire others to do the same. He was right. Eleanor stepped back and let the Pierce children stand together in the courthouse square. 7 siblings, alive and free, proof that the system could be challenged and defeated. A reporter pushed forward. Miss Whitfield, what will you do now? Eleanor looked at the children, then at her friends, then at the crowd of strangers who'd come to witness this moment. I'm going to find a house large enough for 8 people. I'm going to enroll these children in school. I'm going to help them heal and grow and become the people they were meant to be before trauma tried to break them. She paused. And I'm going to keep fighting for other children trapped in similar situations. Because this case showed me something important, that individual courage can create change, that ordinary people can stand against injustice and win. Do you have any message for other families facing similar situations? Another reporter called. Eleanor thought carefully before answering. Yes. If you're a parent who's struggling, reach out for help before you do something you can't undo. There are people who will help you, resources available, alternatives to selling your children into servitude. And if you're someone who sees a child in danger, don't look away. Don't assume someone else will help. Be the person who acts, even when it's hard, even when it's risky, even when the law isn't on your side. Because sometimes the only thing standing between a child and destruction is one person brave enough to care. The reporter scribbled frantically. Eleanor knew her words would be in newspapers across Kansas by tomorrow, possibly further. She hoped they'd reach someone who needed to hear them. Mrs. Hendricks had offered to let them stay at the settlement permanently, but Eleanor had other plans. With Bennett's help, she purchased a small farm outside Millbrook, Nothing grand, just a house with enough bedrooms for everyone and enough land to be self-sufficient. The sale was funded partially by her remaining money and partially by donations from people who'd followed the case and wanted to help. They moved in on a Saturday in May, when the Kansas prairie was finally turning green and wildflowers dotted the fields. The children explored their new home with wonder. Thomas claimed the attic room where he could be alone when needed. Margaret and Sarah chose to share a room so they could talk late into the night. The twins took over a room together, and Benjamin and Daniel bunked nearby. Eleanor's own room was small but sufficient. She stood at the window that first night, watching the sun set over land that was theirs now, truly theirs. In the yard below, she could see the children playing, actual playing, running and laughing in a way they probably hadn't done since before their mother died. "We did it," Lydia said from the doorway. She'd come to help them settle in. "Against all odds, against the law, against common sense, we actually did it." "We did," Eleanor agreed, "though sometimes I still can't quite believe it." "What will you do now? I mean long term. You have 7 children to raise, a farm to run, and probably a reputation as the most stubborn woman in Kansas territory." Eleanor smiled. "I'll raise these children properly. I'll make sure they get educations and opportunities and safety. And then, when they're old enough to manage without me, I'll do it again." "Do what again?" "Fight for children who need someone to fight for them." Judge Harrison was right. There are dozens, maybe hundreds of children trapped in situations like what the Pierce siblings endured. Someone needs to help them. Why not me? Lydia shook her head in amazement. Most people would be content with saving 7 children. You want to save them all. Not all. That's impossible. But some. As many as I can reach. Eleanor turned from the window. "I came west to find a family, Lydia, and I did, just not the one I expected. These 7 children gave me purpose and meaning. How can I not pay that forward?" Downstairs, she heard Benjamin calling for her. She excused herself and went down to find all 7 children gathered in the kitchen, looking uncertain. "What's wrong?" she asked. Thomas stepped forward as their spokesperson. "We were talking, and we realized we don't know what to call you. You're not our mother, but you're not exactly just Eleanor either. We thought we should ask what you'd prefer." Eleanor's throat tightened. She'd wondered about this herself, but had been afraid to raise it. "What would you like to call me?" The children looked at each other. Finally, Sarah spoke. "Would it be all right if we called you Mama? We know you're not our real mother, and we'll always remember her. But you've done everything a mother does, protected us, fought for us, loved us. So if it's okay with you—" Eleanor couldn't speak. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Mama it is then," Thomas said, smiling. "Our first mama gave us life. You gave us life back. Seems fitting." That night, after the children were all in bed, Eleanor sat at the kitchen table and wrote a letter to Samuel Bennett. She outlined her plans to help other children, asked for his advice on legal approaches, and requested his assistance in identifying cases where intervention might be needed. She wrote to Mrs. Hendricks, thanking her for everything and asking her to keep Eleanor informed about any children in the settlement who might need help. She wrote to the territorial newspaper, offering to share her story in detail so that other families might learn from it and so that legislators might understand why child labor contract laws needed reform. And finally, she pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began writing an advertisement. Not for a mail-order bride this time, but for something else entirely. Wanted. Information about children working under labor contracts in Kansas Territory. If you know of a child in danger, write to Eleanor Whitfield, Millbrook, Kansas. All inquiries confidential. Help available for those who need it. She'd send it to every newspaper in the territory. She'd make herself a known resource, someone parents or concerned citizens could contact when children needed rescue. It would be dangerous. It would certainly be exhausting. She'd make more enemies and face more legal challenges. But Eleanor had discovered something about herself over the past months. She was strongest when she was fighting for something bigger than herself. And there was nothing bigger than saving children from the darkness that had nearly consumed the 7 sleeping upstairs. She finished the advertisement, sealed it in an envelope, and set it aside to mail in the morning. Then she walked through the quiet house, checking on each child as they slept. Thomas had finally let go of the tension he'd carried for months, his face peaceful in sleep. Margaret and Sarah lay in their shared bed, Sarah's head on her older sister's shoulder. The twins were tangled together as always, inseparable even in dreams. Daniel clutched a stuffed rabbit Eleanor had bought him, his injuries healing day by day. And Benjamin, the first child she'd saved, slept without nightmares for the first time since she'd known him. 7 children, safe and loved. 7 siblings who'd been torn apart and then stitched back together through determination and grace and pure stubborn refusal to accept that some things couldn't be changed. Eleanor returned to her own room and climbed into bed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There was always more work to be done, more healing needed, more fights to be fought. But tonight, she'd accomplished what she'd set out to do. She'd come to Kansas seeking a family, and she'd found one, in the most unexpected way possible. Not through marriage or blood or traditional bonds, but through choice and sacrifice and the kind of love that says, I will fight for you, and means it. Eleanor Whitfield had arrived in Kansas as a mail-order bride with nowhere else to go. She'd become something far greater, a mother by choice, a fighter for justice, and living proof that one person's courage could change the world for 7 children who desperately needed someone to care. And in saving them, they'd saved her right back, giving her the purpose and family she'd been seeking all along. That was the real miracle. Not that she'd rescued 7 children, but that they'd rescued her too, transforming a woman with nothing into a mother with everything that truly mattered. The story could have ended there, with everyone safe and together. But Eleanor knew it was really just beginning. 7 children had been saved, but countless more waited in darkness. And Eleanor Whitfield, who'd learned that love meant fighting even when the odds seemed impossible, was just getting started.